Kang Min-jun is on his back, and a boot's pressing his shoulder into the mud. Our boy's a cripple, leaning on a wooden crutch that's now snapped in half beside him. 3 guild enforcers wearing the silver wolf crest of his brother's house are standing over him. A document is shoved in his face, and they're telling him to bite his thumb and press it to the paper. He squints at the text. It's a deed transfer for the last plot of land his father owned, the one patch of earth that still legally belongs to their bloodline. Min-jun spits blood onto the dirt and tells them he isn't signing anything. The lead enforcer, a scar-faced man named Gong Chil-soo, laughs and kicks the broken crutch away. He asks what a legless rat is going to do about it. Min-jun tries to push himself up, but his right leg buckles immediately. The old wound from the trial still hasn't healed properly. Hyun-seo's ice blade cut deep into the tendon 2 years ago. Gong Chil-soo crouches down, grabs Min-jun's jaw, and says his brother gave him one mercy already. Signing over a worthless dirt patch is the least he can do in return. Min-jun's eyes flick to the gate just beyond the alley. A crowd is gathering, but nobody moves to help. They know the silver wolf crest means S-rank authority and instant retaliation. Min-jun glances back at the paper, and a cold, familiar pulse thrums deep inside his chest. The egg, it's stirring. He feels it coiled in the dark behind his heartbeat, a faint heat that shouldn't be there. Gong Chil-soo slaps him hard across the face and tells him to stop daydreaming. Min-jun's head snaps sideways, and the taste of iron floods his mouth. He steadies his breathing and forces the heat down. Now is not the time. Too many eyes, too many witnesses, and his brother would know within the hour. He mutters that he'll sign. Gong Chil-soo grins and shoves the paper flat against the cobblestone. Min-jun pricks his thumb on a loose nail sticking out of his crutch's shattered handle. He presses a red print onto the bottom of the document. The enforcer snatches it up, checks the mark, and signals his men to move out. As they walk away, Gong Chil-soo calls back that Hyun-seo sends his regards. Min-jun lies on the ground, staring at the gray sky above the alley. The crowd disperses, and a few coins clink onto the stone beside him from a sympathetic passerby. He doesn't touch the money. He's listening to the egg's pulse slow back to a dormant rhythm inside him. He knows what it wants. It wants to burn. 3 hours later, Min-jun is dragging himself through the marketplace on a borrowed broom-handle crutch. The midday crowd is thick with merchants hawking dungeon-grade herbs and blacksmiths banging out repair jobs on dented pauldrons. He stops at a stall selling roasted meat skewers and trades one of the tossed coins for a stick of greasy pork. The vendor stares at his leg but says nothing. Min-jun eats standing up, propped against a support beam, and watches the guild district's towering spires in the distance. One of those towers belongs to his brother. The central spire, the tallest one, crowned with a glowing ice crystal that never melts even in summer. He bites into the meat and chews slowly. Then the ground shakes, not a tremor, a violent upward jolt that knocks 3 fruit carts over and sends a horse rearing onto its hind legs. Screams erupt from the northern edge of the market. A jagged purple rift tears open in the air above the fountain plaza, spinning like a whirlpool made of shattered glass. People start running. Min-jun knows what that is. A portal. And not a stable one. This is a wild tear, the kind that vomits monsters seconds after it forms. He shoves himself off the beam and starts hobbling away from the plaza. But the crowd is already a stampede. A woman loses her footing and gets trampled before anyone can grab her. Min-jun cuts left into a side lane, using the broom handle to vault over a collapsed vegetable stall. The rift screams behind him, a ripping metal sound that vibrates through his teeth. Then they come. Raptors, 2-legged scaled beasts about the size of large dogs, with sickle claws on their hind legs and rows of needle teeth. They pour out of the portal in a frenzy. 6, then 10, then too many to count. One lands on a fleeing merchant's back and sinks its claws into his shoulders. Another leaps onto a wagon and tears through the canvas cover in 3 swipes. Min-jun keeps moving, one painful hop after another, eyes scanning for a door or a cellar hatch. Then he hears it, a child's cry, high and terrified, coming from behind an overturned spice cart, 10 paces to his left. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, is crouched there with her hands over her ears. Her mother is nowhere in sight. 2 raptors are circling the cart, heads cocked, tails twitching. They're hunting. Min-jun freezes. The egg inside him pulses again, harder this time. It knows. He knows. He drops the broom handle. His leg screams as he takes one unassisted step forward. The first raptor darts in toward the girl. Min-jun reaches inside himself, past the pain and the fear and the cold rage of 2 years of humiliation. He finds the egg, and he squeezes. A wave of white-hot ether erupts from his chest, blowing outward in a visible ring of silver light. The raptors screech and whirl toward him. Min-jun's eyes flare gold. His hair lifts as if caught in a rising wind, and the power flooding his limbs feels like liquid lightning. He lunges. The distance closes in one impossible stride, his bad leg held straight by the rushing current of ether. He grabs the nearest raptor by the throat, crushes its windpipe with a single clench, and hurls its body into the second one. They crash into a stone pillar with a wet snap. 3 more come at him from the right. He spins, catches the lead raptor's claw with his forearm, the scales don't even scratch him, and drives his knee into its ribcage. The bones cave inward. He sweeps the second one's legs and stomps its skull into the cobblestone. The third hesitates. Bad move. Min-jun rips a loose iron bar from the wreckage of the spice cart and spears it through the creature's open mouth. The raptor drops. 5 dead in under 20 seconds. The silver light around him flickers, and he feels the cost kick in. A cold ache spreads through his bones, and a lock of hair drifts past his eyes. It's white. The rest of his hair is noticeably grayer than it was a minute ago. He sways on his feet, and the ether guttering inside him retreats back into the egg. The portal in the plaza collapses with a sucking roar, and the surviving raptors scatter into the city's outer districts. Min-jun collapses to his knees beside the overturned cart. The little girl is still crying, but she's alive. Footsteps pound toward him, and a woman in a fine blue silk dress skids to a halt, her face pale. Lady Ryu Seo-yeon, a noblewoman of the capital and patron of half the city's healer halls, scoops the child into her arms. She looks at the raptor corpses, then at the cripple on the ground with graying hair and fading gold embers in his eyes. She doesn't ask questions. She snaps her fingers, and 2 servants lift Min-jun off the cobblestones and onto a stretcher. She tells them to bring him to her estate's medical tent. Nobody argues with Lady Ryu. Across the plaza, Hyun-seo arrives with a full squad of his guild hunters. Frost clings to his armor, even in the midday sun. He surveys the carnage, the dead raptors, the shattered stalls. His second in command, a gaunt woman named So-jia, with a telepathy ability, kneels beside one of the corpses. She presses 2 fingers to the crushed throat and closes her eyes. She stands and whispers to Hyun-seo. The energy signature on these kills doesn't match any known hunter in the capital. It's not fire, not lightning, not ice. It's something older. Hyun-seo's expression doesn't change, but his jaw tightens. He knows that signature. He felt it once before, 2 years ago, in the moment before he ran his sword through his father's chest. He tells So-jia to track whoever did this, quietly. No reports, no guild logs, and absolutely no word reaching the council. She nods and vanishes into the crowd. Hyun-seo looks toward the noble district, where Lady Ryu's banners are flying above her estate walls. He smiles. Min-jun wakes on a cot inside a canvas medical tent. The smell of antiseptic herbs and fresh bandages fills his nose. His leg is splinted properly for the first time in months. The tent flap rustles, and Lady Ryu steps inside with a clay cup of warm broth. She sets it on the stool beside him and folds her arms. She doesn't waste time on pleasantries. She says she saw what he did in the market. A crippled stable hand doesn't kill 5 raptors with his bare hands. A crippled stable hand with dragon ether flickering in his eyes doesn't exist, unless he's hiding something very, very dangerous. Min-jun's hand tightens on the blanket. He asks if she's going to report him. Lady Ryu laughs once, sharp and humorless. She says reporting him would be boring. The man who framed and crippled him is the same man who's been strangling her trade routes for the past 18 months. She hates Hyun-seo more than she fears a mystery. She tells Min-jun she has a stable on her estate that's been empty since her last groom ran off with a barmaid. The job is his if he wants it. The pay is low, the quarters are cramped, and nobody will look twice at a crippled groom sweeping straw in the stalls. It's the best cover he's ever going to get. Min-jun stares at her. He asks what she expects in return. Lady Ryu picks up the broth and presses the warm cup into his hands. She says she expects nothing. But if the day ever comes when he's ready to burn that silver wolf tower to the ground, she wouldn't mind a front row seat. She smiles. And for the first time since waking up in this second life, Min-jun feels like someone has handed him a real weapon. Min-jun lasts 3 days in Lady Ryu's stables before his body reminds him he's running on borrowed time. The gray in his hair hasn't faded. It's gotten worse. Every morning he wakes up stiffer than the night before, and the egg's warmth in his chest feels a little dimmer. On the fourth morning, he limps to the estate's rear gate and asks a servant where to find an alchemist who doesn't ask questions. The servant points him to a shop in the lower market called Gilded Ash. The place smells like burnt copper and old regrets. The alchemist is a hunched woman named Gong Jin-woong, who peers at him through a loop screwed directly into her eye socket. She takes one look at him and tells him to sit before he falls over. Min-jun doesn't waste time describing the egg. He just says he came into contact with something old and powerful, and now it's eating him from the inside. Gong taps a yellowed fingernail on her counter and asks if this old and powerful thing happens to have a heartbeat. He doesn't answer. She nods like that's answer enough. She tells him the only thing that stabilizes a dormant dragon bond is a heart flame crystal, mined from a living fire-aspected dungeon. Without it, the egg will keep draining his life force until there's nothing left to drain. She estimates he has maybe 6 weeks. Min-jun asks where to find one, and Gong laughs in his face. She tells him the last heart flame anyone pulled out of a dungeon was auctioned for 12,000 gold in the capital, and that was 3 years ago. But there's a D-rank fire dungeon called the Crimson Maw, half a day's ride east, that hasn't been fully stripped. It opens once a month when the moon is new. That's in 4 days. Min-jun thanks her and tries to pay, but Gong waves him off with a bony hand. She says she doesn't charge dying men. She also adds that if he actually survives, he owes her a scale. Not a promise, just a maybe. He limps out into the street with a destination and not much else. Signing up as a porter for a D-rank raid is easier than he expects. The Crimson Maw isn't glamorous, and most decent hunters won't touch a fire dungeon in summer. The expedition leader is a bitter veteran named Im Seok-jin, a man in his late 40s with a missing ear and a permanent scowl welded to his face. He looks at Min-jun's twisted leg and almost laughs him out of the recruitment tent. Min-jun tells him he's been hauling feed sacks and water barrels for Lady Ryu's estate for weeks. A little dungeon heat won't kill him. Seok-jin squints and asks what happened to his leg. Min-jun says he got on the wrong side of a guild enforcer. Seok-jin's expression flickers, not sympathy, but recognition. He tells Min-jun the pay is 10 copper a day, and if he slows the team down, they leave him behind. No exceptions. Min-jun takes the deal. The team assembles at dawn outside the eastern gate. Seok-jin with his scarred longsword, a nervous archer named Cha Do-yun, who can't be older than 17, a tank built like a brewery barrel called Ma Sang-chul, and a healer woman with tired eyes named Yoon Hae-won. Seok-jin counts heads and grunts. 6 porters, 4 fighters, and 1 dungeon nobody's ever fully mapped. He tells everyone to keep their mouths shut and their torches lit. The Crimson Maw sits inside a volcanic fissure half a day's march into the eastern Badlands. Steam vents hiss from cracks in the rock, and the air tastes like sulfur and scorched iron. The dungeon entrance is a vertical shaft lined with ancient dwarven stonework that drops 90 feet straight down. Rope ladders take them into the dark. The heat hits Min-jun the moment his feet touch the floor. It's like stepping into a bread oven. The walls glow a dull amber, veins of molten rock pulsing behind layers of obsidian. Seok-jin calls the formation. Ma Sang-chul takes point. Cha Do-yun covers the rear, and Yoon Hae-won stays in the middle, where the porters are hauling equipment. The first hour is quiet. Too quiet. They pass through a gallery of petrified trees, branches frozen mid-reach like skeletal hands reaching for light. Charred bones litter the floor. Deer, wolves, things too big to be either. Cha Do-yun's bowstring creaks every time he draws it on a shadow that turns out to be nothing. Ma Sang-chul jokes that the kid's going to waste all his arrows on stalagmites. Nobody laughs. They reach a chamber where the ceiling opens into a natural cathedral of basalt columns. And that's when the wyvern drops from the dark. The thing is a nightmare with wings, 12 feet from snout to tail, scales the color of cooling magma, and a barbed stinger that oozes something black and steaming. It hits Ma Sang-chul first, knocking him 10 feet into a stone pillar. The big man crumples and doesn't get up. Cha Do-yun fires 3 arrows in a panic, and all 3 bounce off the wyvern's hide like toothpicks. Seok-jin screams for everyone to fall back, but the wyvern's tail whips across the chamber and blocks the exit with a collapse of stone. They're trapped. Yoon Hae-won crouches over Sang-chul, her healing magic already glowing green around her hands, but she won't reach him in time. The wyvern turns its head, molten eyes fixing on the archer, and Cha Do-yun drops his bow out of sheer terror. Min-jun knows he has maybe 3 seconds before the creature slaughters everyone in this room. He doesn't think about the cost. He doesn't think about the gray in his hair, or the ache in his bones, or Lady Ryu's warning about keeping his head down. He thinks about a little girl in a marketplace, and the 5 raptors he killed with his bare hands, and how he's already dead in 6 weeks if he doesn't get the crystal anyway. The egg inside him pulses. He lets it. The eruption of ether is 10 times what he channeled in the marketplace. Silver light explodes from his chest and wraps his body like a second skin, crackling with arcs of gold and pale blue. His pupils slit vertically, and the bones in his hands shift just enough to make his fingers feel wrong. He opens his mouth, and the egg channels through him, a single condensed stream of dragon fire that roars across the chamber and hits the wyvern square in its open maw. The creature doesn't even have time to scream. The fire punches through the back of its skull and keeps going, blasting a 10-foot hole in the chamber wall and revealing a glowing crystal vein beyond. The wyvern topples, dead before it hits the ground, its head a smoking ruin. The fire cuts out, and Min-jun drops to one knee. White streaks spread through his hair like frost crawling across a window pane, and dark circles sink into the skin beneath his eyes. He looks like he's aged 3 years in 30 seconds. The chamber goes dead silent except for the hiss of cooling rock. Seok-jin stares at him with an expression that cycles through shock, fear, and then something colder, something calculating. He asks Min-jun what in the 9 hells he is. Min-jun doesn't answer. He's too busy trying not to pass out. Yoon Hae-won helps him to his feet, while the remaining porters gawk at the wyvern corpse and the hole blasted clean through solid obsidian. She doesn't say anything, but her hands are shaking as she checks his vitals. She tells him his mana channels are fried, and he shouldn't be conscious right now. Seok-jin orders the team to salvage what they can from the wyvern and the crystal vein. The porters work fast, chipping heartflame shards from the exposed wall with pickaxes and loading them into padded crates. Nobody looks Min-jun in the eye. Nobody wants to. Cha Do-yun retrieves his bow with trembling hands and asks Seok-jin what they're going to do about the porter who just breathed fire. Seok-jin tells him to shut up and keep digging. Min-jun pockets a crystal shard the size of his thumb when no one's watching. It hums against his skin, warm and alive, and the egg stirs faintly in response. The trip back to the surface is a blur of exhaustion and sideways glances. Seok-jin keeps his distance, but Min-jun catches him muttering to Yoon Hae-won in low tones when they stop to rest. He doesn't need to hear the words to know what they're discussing. A crippled porter doesn't kill a wyvern with dragonfire. A crippled porter with that kind of power is either a weapon or a bounty. And Seok-jin doesn't look like a man who passes up a payday. They reach the surface at dusk. The Badlands stretch out in every direction, painted orange and violet by the setting sun, and the air is cool enough to feel like a blessing after the dungeon's furnace heat. Seok-jin calls for camp half a mile from the entrance. Everyone is too tired to argue. Min-jun volunteers for the first watch, knowing he won't sleep anyway. He finds a flat rock 100 yards from camp and sits with the heartflame shard cupped in both palms. The egg responds immediately, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat and drawing tiny threads of warmth from the crystal into his core. For the first time in weeks, the ache in his bones eases. The gray doesn't reverse, but it also doesn't spread. He figures he bought himself another month, maybe 2, if he can get the rest of the ritual components together. Then Seok-jin appears out of the dark with a torch in one hand and his longsword in the other. He tells Min-jun he's been thinking about what happened in the chamber, and he's come to a conclusion. Min-jun doesn't move. He asks, what kind of conclusion? Seok-jin says the guildmaster of the Silver Wolf has been quietly offering a reward for any information about unusual energy signatures spotted in the capital region. The bounty is generous enough to retire on. He doesn't know who Min-jun is or why Hyun-seo wants him, but a man with dragonfire in his throat and a face that doesn't match any hunter registry is exactly the kind of anomaly Hyun-seo's been asking about. Min-jun stands slowly, the crystal still clutched in his left hand. He tells Seok-jin to think carefully about what he does next. Seok-jin smiles without humor and says he already has. He turns and walks back to camp, and Min-jun knows that the moment they reach the city, Seok-jin is going straight to the Silver Wolf Guild Hall. The leak is already open. Min-jun waits until the camp goes quiet, then slips away into the dark with his crystal and his crutch, and a 6-hour head start on the hunters who will be coming for him by sunrise. He makes it 10 miles before dawn, following a dry riverbed to mask his tracks. The shard's warmth keeps him moving, even when his leg screams for rest. And by the time the sun clears the eastern mountains, he's approaching the outskirts of Valtara, through a smuggler's gate he remembers from his first life. The gatekeeper is a toothless old woman who charges 2 copper and asks no questions. He's inside the walls by mid-morning, but the city feels wrong. Too many guild patrols on the main streets, too many eyes scanning the crowd with that particular hunter stillness that means they're looking for someone. Min-jun keeps his hood up and his head down, limping through back alleys toward Lady Ryu's estate, hoping he can reach her before Seokjin's information does. He turns a corner at the back of a grain warehouse near the river docks, and 3 men step out of the shadows to block his path. They're dressed in plain clothes, but their movements are too precise for common thugs. Hunter-level coordination, probably C rank at minimum. The lead one has frost creeping along his knuckles, despite the summer heat. He tells Min-jun that the guildmaster sends his regards, and that he should have stayed in whatever hole he crawled out of. Min-jun backs up against the warehouse wall. The crystal is still in his pocket, still warm, but he's running on fumes after the wyvern and the overnight march. He can't summon the egg again without risking total collapse, and these 3 aren't going to wait for him to power up. The frost knuckle assassin takes a step forward. Min-jun's hand closes around a loose brick in the alley wall. He's got one play, and it's not a good one. Guess what he does with it? Min-jun's hand closes around the loose brick. He yanks it free and hurls it not at the assassins, but at the water barrel by the warehouse door. The barrel explodes, and a wave of murky water surges across the cobblestones. The frost knuckle assassin steps forward, and his boot hits the flooded stone at exactly the wrong angle. He goes down hard, his ice-coated fist cracking the ground where his head nearly hits. The other 2 hesitate for half a second, which is all Min-jun needs. He doesn't fight. He bolts. His crutch skids on the wet stone, but he's already practiced this exact drunk stagger escape 100 times in alleys just like this one. A blade whistles past his ear and gouges the warehouse wall. Min-jun throws himself sideways into a gap between 2 grain silos, a space so narrow the hunters have to turn their shoulders just to follow. The second assassin shoves through first, short sword drawn, and Min-jun is already 5 steps ahead. He reaches into the egg's residual warmth, not a full summon, just a whisper of heat, and slams his palm against a pile of old flour sacks. The dust billows up in a thick white cloud that fills the alley like a fog bank. The assassin coughs and swings blind. Min-jun is already gone, dropping through a rusted grate he spotted on his way in. The tunnels beneath Valtara smell of rot and old river water and rat droppings, but they're also pitch dark and winding enough to lose 3 hunters in about 30 seconds. He can hear them above, boots pounding on the grate, one of them cursing loud enough to echo. Then silence, and the distant splash of someone climbing down a different shaft in the wrong direction. Of course, they don't know these tunnels the way he does. He spent his first life exploring every smuggler's route and sewer branch in the city, back when he was a dragon rider with too much time and too much curiosity. The knowledge stuck even after reincarnation, and now it's keeping him alive. Min-jun moves deeper, one hand on the slimy wall for balance, the heart flame shard cupped in his other hand to give him just enough light to see the next few steps. He walks for what feels like an hour, following a branch that slopes steadily downward until the air changes. The rot smell fades, replaced by something dry and old, stone dust and incense ashes, and the faint copper tang of ancient blood. Min-jun stops. He knows this scent, and it isn't sewer gas. He limps forward, and the tunnel opens into a cavern that shouldn't exist beneath the river district. The ceiling vaults 30 feet overhead, carved with faded murals of winged serpents circling a single massive star. At the center of the chamber stands a stone altar shaped like a coiled dragon, its jaws open toward the ceiling as if waiting to catch fire from the heavens. A temple of the dragon god, abandoned for at least 2 centuries judging by the dust. Min-jun laughs, a dry rasp that hurts his ribs. He was looking for a place to perform the hatching ritual, and the universe just handed him a consecrated altar in a lost temple under his enemy's own city. The egg pulses against his sternum, urgent and almost painful now. He doesn't wait. He limps to the altar, brushes centuries of dust off its surface, and arranges the heart flame shard in the dragon jaw basin. The shard ignites on contact with the altar, not with ordinary fire, but with a silver-white flame that casts no heat and makes no sound. Guess what happens next? The egg inside him cracks, one clean fracture, like a rib breaking, and then a rush of warmth that floods every nerve in his body. Min-jun's knees buckle, and he catches himself on the altar edge as the silver flame leaps from the basin and spirals around his torso in a tight cyclone. His vision whites out, and he's somewhere else, a vast mental space that feels like the sky just before a thunderstorm. And there, floating in the center of that storm, is a dragon. It's tiny, no bigger than a house cat, with scales the color of polished silver and wings too small to lift it yet. But its eyes are ancient, deep violet, and when they meet his, A voice slams into his skull like a door kicked open. The dragonette says she's been waiting in the dark for 900 years, and she's very tired of it, thank you very much. Min-jun nearly topples off the altar. The voice is clear, telepathic, and unmistakably sarcastic. He asks if all dragons are this mouthy, and the dragonette flicks her tail and says, only the ones who get stuck inside idiot humans. And just like that, the bond snaps into place. It's not like the partial link he had before. This is a full soul tether, 2 minds sharing 1 channel, and the sheer intimacy of it nearly knocks him out. He can feel her heartbeat layered beneath his own, quick and light like a hummingbird's wings. He can feel her hunger, her curiosity, the faint echo of memories from his own past life bleeding across the link. The dragonette catches the memory of a snowy battlefield and a lance wreathed in gold fire. She asks if that was him, and Min-jun says it was, a long time ago. She tells him his aim was terrible. Min-jun laughs, and for the first time since he woke up in this crippled body, the sound is real. The silver flame dies down, and Min-jun opens his eyes to find the dragonette perched on the altar, her claws gripping the stone like a falcon on a glove. She's real, solid, covered in fine silver scales that shimmer faintly even in the low light. He reaches out, and she nips his finger hard enough to draw blood. She says that's for making her wait so long, and Min-jun decides right there to call her Elys. It's an old name, the name of the first dragon who ever bonded with a human, in the legends his mother used to read him. Elys tilts her head and says it'll do. Then she opens her mouth and breathes a tiny jet of silver flame at a fallen torch on the temple floor. The torch catches, burns for about 2 seconds, and leaves the cloth slightly singed. Elys stares at the sad little scorch mark and says that was supposed to be more impressive. Min-jun tells her she just hatched and she can already light a torch, which is more than most dragons can do in their first week. Elys flicks her tail again and says most dragons aren't bonded to a degenerate with a broken leg and 3 assassins on his trail. She has a point. But the bond hums between them, and Min-jun can feel something else riding beneath her sarcasm, a current of information that isn't words. Images flicker across his mind. A guild hall with silver wolf banners, a tall figure in frost blue armor, a room full of maps with red pins marking search grids across the entire capital district. Hyun-soo is coordinating a citywide hunt, and he's pulling in hunters from 3 separate guild branches to do it. Elys says she can feel him from here. The man with ice in his blood, and an echo of Min-jun's own soul signature. She can sense his movements even when he's on the other side of the city. Min-jun asks if she's serious, and Elys tilts her head and says she's never not serious. This changes everything. He was planning to hide, lick his wounds, and train in secret until the dragon was strong enough to face an S rank. But with Elys feeding him real-time intel on Hyun-soo's position, he can stay 2 steps ahead instead of always reacting. He can take the fight to the wilderness, grow the dragon on his own terms, and pick his battles until he's ready. He asks Elys where Hyun-soo is right now. She closes her violet eyes for a moment, and when she opens them, she says he's at the eastern gate, arguing with a captain who won't let him search civilian caravans without a writ. That gives Min-jun at least 6 hours before the search expands that far. He scoops Elys onto his shoulder. She's light as a sparrow, and limps toward a secondary tunnel he remembers from his smuggling days. This one leads north, straight under the city walls, and into the forested foothills beyond. Elys digs her claws into the shoulder of his tunic and says she's hungry. Min-jun asks if she eats rats, and Elys says she will set his eyebrows on fire. He takes that as a no. They travel through the dark for another 3 hours, following the tunnel until it slopes upward and daylight starts bleeding through cracks in the ceiling. Min-jun emerges into a rocky gully about 2 miles north of the city walls, hidden by brambles and a collapsed watchtower that nobody's used in decades. The air is cold and clean, pine-scented, and the only sound is birdsong. Elys lifts her head and sniffs the wind, her nostrils flaring. She says there's something big moving through the trees to the east, something with a lot of meat on its bones. Min-jun asks if it's a dire boar, and Elys says she doesn't know what that is, but it smells delicious. She also tells him he's eating rats, whether she has to hunt or not. Min-jun doesn't dignify that with a response. They move into the tree line, and within 20 minutes, Elys pinpoints the boar's location with eerie precision. It's a massive beast, easily 300 pounds, with tusks that could gut an unarmored man in one pass. In his current condition, Min-jun has no business fighting a dire boar, with nothing but a crutch and a hatchling dragon. But he's also got a cheat that the boar doesn't know about. And he's been eating rats for 2 days. He sets the trap carefully, Positioning himself upwind with a deadfall log and a sharpened branch, he spends an hour whittling into a makeshift spear. Elys perches on a low branch above the game trail, her silver scales almost invisible against the gray bark. She says the boar is coming, and she sounds way too excited for someone who can barely light a torch. The boar crashes through the underbrush with all the subtlety of a battering ram, and Min-jun waits until it's 5 paces from the deadfall before he kicks the trigger. The log slams down across the boar's hindquarters, pinning it but not killing it. It squeals, thrashing, and Min-jun lunges with the sharpened branch. The tip punches through hide and muscle, and Elys launches off her branch with a tiny shriek. She breathes her sad little flame directly into the wound he just opened, cauterizes it from the inside. The boar convulses once and goes still, smoke curling from the spear hole like a chimney. Min-jun stares at Elys, who lands on the boar's head with a satisfied chirp. She tells him it's not about the size of the flame, it's about where you put it. Our boy just stares at the dead boar, and then at the cat-sized dragon preening on its snout. He asks if she learned that from his memories. Elys says no, she learned it from watching him fight the wyvern through the egg. Apparently, she's been watching the whole time. Min-jun skins the boar with the knife he lifted from a smuggler's cache in the tunnel, and they eat roasted pork over a fire Elys can just barely keep lit for more than 30 seconds. The gold from the boar's tusks and hide will get them a disguise kit and a wagon if he can find a trader on the northern road who doesn't ask questions. Elys curls up against his neck and falls asleep immediately, her tiny heartbeat syncing with his. Min-jun doesn't sleep for a long time. He sits with his back against a pine trunk, watching the stars, and lets the bond hum between them like a second pulse. For the first time since Hyun-seo framed him and left him crippled, he has a real weapon. It's small, sarcastic, and currently drooling on his collar, but it's his. And when Hyun-seo finally finds them, and he will find them, that tiny silver dragon is going to be a whole lot bigger. Hyun-seo isn't the only one who can play the long game. The fire dies to embers, and somewhere in the forest, an owl calls. Min-jun finally closes his eyes, and Elys mumbles something in his head about needing a bigger breakfast tomorrow. He doesn't argue. The wilderness stretches north for 100 miles of monster territory and forgotten trails, and they've got a lot of growing to do. Min-jun wakes at dawn with Elys still drooling on his collar and a dead boar to turn into coin. The northern road cuts through the pines about a mile east of their camp, and he can already hear wagon wheels creaking. He wraps the boar tusks in oilcloth and straps the hide into a tight bundle, then limps toward the road with Elys tucked inside his tunic. She complains that it smells like dead pig and old sweat, and Min-jun tells her that's the price of staying hidden. Elys says the price is too high, and she wants hazard pay and bacon. Our boy doesn't even know what hazard pay is, but he's pretty sure she just made it up. They reach the road by mid-morning and spot a trader's caravan rolling south. 3 wagons with faded blue awnings and a bored-looking guard on the lead horse. The trader is a wiry woman named Mistress Cho, her face wind-burned and her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She eyes Min-jun's limp and the patched tunic and immediately asks if he's a deserter or a bandit. Min-jun says he's a potion seller whose wagon broke down 3 miles back, and he's looking to buy a replacement. Mistress Cho asks where his stock is, and Min-jun says it's still in the wreck with his partner, who's guarding it. She doesn't believe him for a second, but she sees the boar tusks, and her eyes flicker with interest. Dire boar ivory fetches 4 gold a tusk in the capital markets, and she knows it. Elys whispers that the woman's heart rate just jumped, and Min-jun files that away. He offers both tusks for a covered wagon and a disguise kit, dyes, false papers, and a trader's badge. Mistress Cho laughs and says that's worth 6 gold at least, and she's not in the charity business. Min-jun adds the boar hide and says he'll throw in directions to a secret hunting ground north of the ridge. She squints at him for a long moment, then spits in her palm and holds it out. He spits in his and shakes, and just like that, he's the proud owner of a rickety covered wagon with a patched canvas roof and a crate of half-spoiled herbs that smell like a swamp. Elys says the herbs are definitely not potion grade, and Min-jun tells her they're not selling to nobles. He spends the next hour behind a boulder with the disguise kit, working dye into his hair until it's a muddy brown and smearing walnut paste on his face to darken his complexion. A strip of leather wrapped around his left forearm hides the scar Hyun-seo's men would recognize, and a pair of brass-rimmed spectacles with plain glass lenses changes the shape of his face. Elys watches from the wagon bench and says he looks like a librarian who fell in a river. Min-jun asks if that's good or bad, and Elys says it's perfect because no one looks twice at a drowned librarian. He practices walking without the limp for 10 painful minutes before his leg gives out, so he leans harder on the crutch and decides it'll have to be part of the cover. A crippled potion peddler is twice as invisible as a healthy one. They roll south on the northern road by noon, the wagon's axle squealing like a stuck pig. And Min-jun keeps his head down whenever another traveler passes. Elys curls up in the herb crate and practices telepathy, which mostly consists of her narrating every bird she sees and critiquing his driving. She tells him he holds the reins like a man who's never seen a horse before, and Min-jun points out that he was a stable boy, and she's a lizard who hatched 3 days ago. Elys says that's slander, and she's a dragon, not a lizard. Min-jun asks what the difference is, and Elys says dragons have better comebacks. He can't argue with that. By evening, they reach a way station where 3 other wagons are already parked around a communal fire, and Min-jun pulls in like he's done this 100 times. A fat merchant named Garros waves him over and offers a bowl of stew in exchange for news from the north. Min-jun sits by the fire and spins a story about bandits on the ridge and a wyvern sighting near the Crimson Maw, all things he actually saw, but twisted just enough to sound like second-hand gossip. Garros eats it up, and nobody looks twice at the limping potion seller with the cheap spectacles. Elys stays silent in the herb crate, and Min-jun can feel her amusement humming through the bond like a purr. He sleeps in the wagon that night with one hand on his knife, but no one bothers him. The next morning, Elys wakes him with a thought that isn't about food or insults. She says his name, not Min-jun, but a name he hasn't heard in 15 years. Wu Jin. Min-jun freezes with his hand halfway to the water skin, and the memories hit him like a falling wall. Wu Jin Voss, rider of the silver dragon Astaroth, the last dragon knight of the Eclipsed Order. He remembers the saddle leather under his thighs and the sound of Astaroth's wings splitting the sky. And he remembers the face of the man who betrayed him, General Valdrek, the Shadow Hand, whose soul imprint has festered for 3 centuries and now wears the body of No Hyun-seo. Elys says she's been sifting through his memories since the egg cracked. And the bond isn't new. It's been dormant since the day Valdrek stabbed him in the back at the Battle of Falling Stars. Min-jun asks why she didn't tell him sooner, and Elys says she wanted to be sure, because telling a man he used to be a legendary warrior when he can barely walk without a crutch is a lot to drop on someone. She also says she remembers everything from her past life too, including the spell Valdrek used to shatter their bond and scatter her soul across 3 centuries. That spell is why she hatched as a runt instead of a full drake, and why Min-jun's mana pathways are so damaged. Valdrek didn't just kill them, he cursed them to be reborn broken. Min-jun sits in the wagon with the dawn light filtering through the canvas and lets the weight of it settle on his shoulders. Then he asks the only question that matters: can they fix it? Elys says the curse weakens every time they use the bond, which is why his hair bleached white after the raptor fight, and why she grew half an inch after the wyvern battle. Pain is the price of breaking the chains, and they've already started paying it. Min-jun says he's paid worse for less, and Elys says she knows, she was there. He straps on his crutch and climbs into the driver's seat, and the wagon creaks back onto the road with a new kind of weight riding in his chest. Not despair, purpose. They roll into the Capitol gates 3 days later, and the guards barely glance at his forged trader's badge before waving him through. The Capitol market is a riot of color and noise, hawkers screaming over each other, and the smell of roasting meat mixing with horse dung and cheap perfume. Min-jun parks the wagon in a rented stall near the East Fountain and sets up the herb crate like he's been doing it for years. He sells 3 bundles of dried rosemary and a jar of suspect-smelling salve to a housewife who haggles him down to half price. And Elys tells him he's a terrible businessman. Min-jun says he's not trying to be a businessman, he's trying to be invisible, and invisible people don't turn a profit. He's halfway through his 2nd day when a stooped old man in servant's livery shuffles up to the stall and asks for something for joint pain. Min-jun reaches for the willow bark, but the old man grabs his wrist with surprising strength and stares at his face. The old man's eyes go wide, and he whispers a name Min-jun hasn't heard spoken aloud in years. Kang Min-jun, youngest son of Commander Kang Dae-hyun, who was executed for treason 2 years ago. Min-jun's blood turns to ice, and Elys tenses inside the herb crate, ready to breathe fire. But the old man doesn't shout for the guards. He presses a folded letter into Min-jun's palm and says his name is Jung Pil-soo, and he served the Kang family for 40 years before Hyun-soo dismissed the old staff. He recognized Min-jun's eyes, the same gray as his mother's, he says, and no amount of walnut dye can hide them. Jung Pil-soo tells him to read the letter in private and burn it after, then shuffles away into the crowd like he was never there. Min-jun waits until the market closes and the other vendors start packing up before he ducks into the wagon and unfolds the letter with shaking hands. The handwriting is his father's, sharp, precise strokes that Min-jun remembers from 100 scolding letters about his training. The letter is dated 3 days before Commander Kang's execution, and it's addressed to Min-jun directly. It says Hyunseo came to him the night before with a bottle of wine and a smile, and by the time the commander felt the poison working, it was too late. He wrote the letter in his final hours, hiding it in the lining of his favorite chair, knowing Jung Pil-soo would find it after the execution. And he tells Min-jun about the vault, a hidden chamber beneath the ancestral estate's main study, sealed with a bloodlock that only a Kang heir can open. Inside is the proof: Hyunseo's correspondence with the Assassin Guild, the empty poison vial, and a list of witnesses who were paid to lie at the trial. Min-jun reads the letter 3 times, and Elys reads it through his eyes, silent for once. When he finally lowers the paper, Elys says one thing: the Harvest Festival is in 4 days. The Harvest Festival is the one night of the year when the estate throws its gates open to nobles and commoners alike. A tradition Commander Kang started to win the people's trust. Hyunseo kept the tradition because canceling it would look suspicious. But he's never happy about the crowds. Min-jun realizes that's his window: 4 days to plan an infiltration into the most heavily guarded private residence in Valtara. With nothing but a limp, a hatchling dragon, and a dead man's letter. He burns the letter in the wagon's small brazier and watches the ashes curl into smoke. Elys asks what the plan is, and Min-jun says the plan is to walk through the front door with a crate of potions and a catering badge. The estate hires a dozen food vendors for the festival, and the kitchen staff is too overworked to check every face. Min-jun spends the next 2 days scouting the estate from the outside, mapping guard rotations and delivery schedules from a rooftop across the street. Elys perches on his shoulder and catalogs everything with her telepathic senses. 9 guards on the outer wall, 6 at the main gate, 2 patrols that cross every 12 minutes, and a single blind spot behind the old stable where the ivy grows thick enough to climb. The stable hasn't been used since Min-jun was a boy, because Hyunseo keeps his horses at the guild headquarters now. That's where Min-jun will enter, because he knows the stable's layout better than any guard alive. On the morning of the Harvest Festival, Min-jun shaves off the brown dye and scrubs the walnut paste from his face, because tonight he's not hiding. Tonight he's Kang Min-jun, and he's walking into his father's house. Elys says that's either very brave or very stupid, and Min-jun says those have always been the same thing for him. He dresses in the plain tunic of a kitchen carrier, straps his crutch tight to his arm, and tucks Elys into a false-bottomed herb crate with a breathing hole drilled in the side. They join the stream of supply wagons rolling through the estate's side gate an hour before sunset, and no one gives the limping porter a second glance. Min-jun carries the crate into the kitchen under a cloud of steam and shouting cooks, and Elys whispers that she can smell roasted pheasant, and it's making her reconsider her life choices. He slips away from the kitchen line while the head chef is screaming at a boy who dropped a tray of tarts, and he moves through the servant corridors like a ghost. Every turn and doorway is exactly where he remembers from childhood, and his heart pounds with a mix of rage and grief he can't name. He reaches the study door at the end of the East Hall, the same study where his father used to read him war stories by the fire. The lock is new, a dwarven mechanism with 3 tumblers, but Min-jun spent 2 years running smuggling routes through the rat tunnels, and there isn't a lock in Valtara he can't pick with a bent nail. He's inside in 30 seconds. The study smells like dust and old leather, and the desk is covered in Hyunseo's papers, guild contracts, tax records, and a half-written letter to a noblewoman Min-jun doesn't recognize. Elys tells him to hurry, because the guard rotation shifts in 4 minutes, and the patrol passes this hallway at the top of the hour. Min-jun moves to the fireplace, where a portrait of Commander Kang still hangs in a gilded frame, and he presses the stone behind the 3rd brick from the left. A section of the bookshelf slides back with a soft grinding noise, revealing a spiral staircase that spirals down into darkness. Elys says there's mana down there, old and strong, and it tastes like his father's blood. Min-jun descends, and the vault door at the bottom is a slab of black iron inscribed with the Kang family crest, a rearing stallion wreathed in flames. He presses his palm to the bloodlock, and a needle pricks his finger and draws a single drop. The door groans open, and inside the vault are his father's journals, a sealed testimony from the royal physician who examined the body, and a glass vial containing the last drops of the poison that killed Commander Kang Dae-hyun. Min-jun gathers everything into a leather satchel, his hand steady for the first time in 2 years. He has the proof. He has the means to destroy his brother. And then the siren goes off. The siren screams. It's a wail that rattles the teeth and splits the night wide open, and every guard in the estate snaps to attention. Elys hisses in his mind that they've got maybe 90 seconds before the first patrol hits this hallway. Min-jun doesn't waste a breath. He shoves the journals and the poison vial into the leather satchel, straps it tight across his chest, and moves for the stairs. His crutch clacks hard on the stone steps as he climbs, and the spiral staircase feels twice as long going up as it did coming down. The study door is still open, but torchlight is already flooding the corridor outside. Boots hammer the floorboards, at least 6 men, and they're moving fast. Elys pokes her head out of the herb crate and asks if he's got a plan that doesn't involve them both getting skewered. Min-jun says the plan is the window. He limps to the tall casement window behind the desk, throws the latch, and shoves it open just as the study door splinters inward. 3 hunters in gild plate pour through, swords drawn and mana flaring off their blades like frost. And right behind them, walking slow and calm with his hands clasped behind his back, is No Hyun-seo. Hyun-seo smiles, that same cold smile Min-jun remembers from the night their father died. He says he was wondering when his little brother would come home. Min-jun doesn't answer. He swings his legs over the sill and drops 2 stories into the rose garden below, landing hard on his good leg with a grunt. The crate bounces, but Elys stays tucked, and she says the hunters are already coming down the stairs. Min-jun pushes to his feet and runs. Well, runs as fast as a man with a crutch can run through a dark garden maze. The hedges are overgrown because Hyun-seo fired the old groundskeeper years ago, and that's the only thing that saves him. He knows every dead end and hidden turn in this garden, because he used to play hide-and-seek here with the stable boys when he was a child. Elys guides him from above now, having slipped out of the crate and fluttered into the branches. She's no bigger than a cat, and her silver scales catch the moonlight just barely enough for him to track her silhouette against the leaves. She says there's a hunter on the garden wall, northern corner, ice bow drawn. Min-jun ducks left as an arrow of solid frost whistles past his ear and shatters against a stone fountain. The second arrow clips his satchel strap and freezes the leather solid, but he tears it free and keeps moving. Elys drops onto his shoulder and says the 3 hunters are spreading out to flank him. They know the garden layout too. Of course they do. Hyun-seo has probably drilled them on every inch of this estate for exactly this moment. Min-jun rounds the old koi pond and spots the eastern gate, a wrought iron thing with a heavy crossbar. The gate leads to the delivery road, and the delivery road leads to the canal. If he can get through that gate, he's gone. But the gate is locked. A dwarven chain wraps the bars, glowing with a faint blue enchantment that hums in the dark. Elys says it's a frost seal. Anything that touches it freezes solid. Min-jun doesn't have time to pick it, and he doesn't have anything that can break an enchanted chain. The 3 hunters emerge from the hedges at once, forming a triangle around him. One's a swordswoman with a blade wreathed in ice, one's the archer with another arrow already knocked, and the third is a massive brawler with gauntlets that crackle with raw mana. And behind them, strolling through the garden like he's out for an evening walk, comes Hyun-seo. Hyun-seo tells his brother to stop running. It's embarrassing. He says the vault was a trap, of course. Did Min-jun really think he'd leave the evidence just sitting there unguarded? The siren was keyed to the bloodlock the moment Hyun-seo took the estate. He's been waiting 2 years for Min-jun to crawl back and trigger it. Min-jun's jaw tightens. He was played. He walked right into his brother's hands, and now he's cornered in his own childhood garden with 3 S-rank hunters closing in. Elys presses against his neck and says she's got 1 shot, but it'll cost her. She's been hoarding mana ever since the dungeon, and she can manage 1 concentrated burst. It won't kill an S-rank, but it might buy them time. Min-jun asks if it'll hurt her. Elys says she'll be too tired to fly for a while, but she won't die. That's good enough. The swordswoman lunges first, her blade trailing a crescent of frost. Min-jun throws himself sideways, and the ice slices through the hedge behind him, turning a 10-foot section into frozen splinters. The brawler charges next, gauntlets swinging. Min-jun rolls under the first punch, and the second one clips his crutch and shatters it into kindling. He hits the ground hard, and the satchel with the evidence skids across the cobblestones. The archer draws her bow and aims at his chest. Hyun-seo raises a hand to stop her. He says he wants the dragon alive. The brother he couldn't care less about. Min-jun looks at Elys. Elys looks at the gate, and then she opens her mouth and breathes. The fireball isn't big. It's the size of a fist when it leaves her throat, but it's dense in a way that makes the air ripple. It hits the enchanted chain, and the frost seal screams. Steam explodes outward in a white cloud, and the chain glows red, then orange, then white-hot. The enchantment cracks. The gate groans and the crossbar snaps, and the whole iron assembly swings open with a shriek of tortured metal. Elys collapses against Min-jun's collar, her scales dim and her breathing shallow. She whispers that she's done. She can't do that again for at least a day. Min-jun scoops her into his palm, shoves her gently into his tunic, and grabs the satchel with his other hand. The hunters are still blinking steam out of their eyes. He runs. The delivery road is empty because the harvest festival is happening on the other side of the estate, and no one's back here at this hour. His crutch is gone, so he's limping hard, and every step sends a bolt of pain up his left leg, but he doesn't stop. The canal is 3 blocks away, a broad stone channel that cuts through the capital and empties into the river outside the walls. If he can reach it, he can vanish. Behind him, Hyun-so's voice cuts through the dark, cold and sharp. He calls out that there's nowhere in Valtara his brother can hide. Min-jun doesn't look back. He rounds the corner and sees the canal, 15 feet wide, dark water moving fast, and a stone bridge crossing it 50 yards to the north. He doesn't go for the bridge, he goes for the edge. A guard patrol spots him from the bridge and shouts, but Min-jun doesn't stop. He tucks the satchel tight, holds Elys against his chest, and jumps. The water hits like a wall of ice. The canal is fed by mountain runoff, and it's cold enough to steal his breath and turn his limbs to lead. But he lets the current take him, dragging him under the stone embankment and into the darkness of the drainage tunnels. Elys sputters in his mind, wet and miserable, and says she hates water. Min-jun surfaces inside a tunnel, gasping, and pulls himself onto a narrow maintenance ledge. Guards are shouting on the street above, but the current has already carried him a quarter mile from where he jumped. He lies on the cold stone and breathes. Elys crawls out of his tunic and shakes herself like a wet cat, then curls up in the hollow of his shoulder. She says Hyun-so knew. The whole thing, the vault, the journal, the poison vial, it was all bait. Min-jun opens the satchel and checks the contents. The journals are waterlogged but readable, and the glass vial is still intact. The evidence is real. Hyun-so wanted to catch him, but he didn't want to destroy the proof, which means the proof is authentic, and Hyun-so was gambling that Min-jun would be too slow to escape with it. Min-jun smiles in the dark. His brother has always been too arrogant for his own good. Above ground, the city is waking up to chaos. Hyun-so stands at the edge of the canal with his 3 hunters, and his expression has lost its smile. He tells the swordswoman to sound the city lockdown. Every gate, every patrol, every checkpoint. No one leaves Valtara without his personal authorization. The swordswoman asks what they're telling the guards. Hyun-so says a fugitive stole family heirlooms from the estate. A cripple with gray-streaked hair and a limp. Hyun-so's personal guard spreads the description to every watch captain in the capital within the hour. Min-jun drags himself out of the drainage tunnel at dawn, soaked and shivering, and finds a forgotten cellar beneath an abandoned tannery on the east side of the city. The place reeks of old chemicals and rot, which means no one comes here. Elys is still too weak to fly, but her senses are coming back. She says she can feel Hyun-so's mana signature moving across the city. He's at the guild headquarters, and he's furious. Min-jun dries the journals page by page over a small fire built from broken crate wood, and he reads his father's final words by the flickering light. Commander Kang Dae-hyun knew. He wrote that he suspected Hyun-so of conspiring with foreign guilds to seize the family seat, and he'd ordered a full investigation 3 days before he died. The royal physician's testimony confirms it. The poison was a rare necromantic serum that mimics heart failure. Hyun-so bought it from a black market alchemist in the southern quarter. Min-jun has everything he needs to destroy his brother in the court of public opinion. The problem is getting it out. By midday, the lockdown is absolute. Every gate is sealed, every bridge is guarded, and Hyun-so's hunters are searching wagons and questioning travelers. Min-jun watches from a rooftop as a street crier on the market square shouts the morning news. A hunt for a fugitive thief. Reward offered. Report all sightings. The crier is a wiry old man with a voice like gravel and a face that says he's been doing this job too long to care about politics. Min-jun decides to take a gamble. He buys a strip of cloth from a rag vendor, scribbles a single line from the physician's testimony onto it with charcoal, and folds it around a copper coin. Then he limps down to the square, hood up and head low, and tosses the cloth-wrapped coin into the crier's collection box. The old man glances at him, curious. Min-jun says if he wants to make more money than he's seen in his life, he should read that message aloud at noon. Then he vanishes into the crowd. At noon, the crier climbs his platform and bellows the message across the square. The words are simple. Commander Kang Dae-hyun was poisoned by his own son. The market goes silent. Dozens of people freeze mid-transaction, and whispers spread like wildfire. Within minutes, Hyun-so's guards swarm the square. They drag the crier off his platform and smash his collection box against the cobblestones. The old man is arrested on the spot and hauled away to the guild dungeons, still shouting that he was just reading what someone paid him to read. Min-jun watches from the shadow of a butcher's stall, and Elys says that didn't go very well. Min-jun says it went exactly as he expected. Now the rumor is out, and Hyun-soo can't unring that bell. But rumor isn't proof, and Min-jun knows he needs something more permanent. He finds a printer's shop in the artisan quarter, a cramped little place run by a stooped man with ink-stained fingers and gambling debts. The printer owes money to some very unpleasant people, and Min-jun offers him enough gold to clear his debts in exchange for one print run. The printer takes the deal. Min-jun hands over a handwritten copy of the physician's testimony, and the printer sets the type. The pamphlets are crude but readable. 100 copies, each one detailing exactly how Hyun-soo poisoned his father and seized the family seat. The printer promises to have them distributed by morning through his network of street vendors. Min-jun pays him half now and half on delivery, then slips back to the tannery cellar to wait. Morning comes, and the pamphlets don't appear. Min-jun limps back to the artisan quarter and finds the printer's shop a smoldering ruin. The press is smashed to splinters, the type is scattered across the street, and the printer himself is hanging from a lamppost with a guild seal pinned to his chest. Hyun-soo's thugs got there first. Elys says this is getting worse. Min-jun leans against a wall and presses his palm to his forehead. He's got the truth in his satchel, and no way to make anyone hear it. And then a hand clamps down on his shoulder. The hand on Min-jun's shoulder isn't there by accident. It belongs to a bounty hunter built like a brick wall, and his friend is already stepping out of the alley mouth with a short blade drawn. Min-jun drops his weight and twists, but the big guy's grip is a vice, and he can't break it. The knife man lunges, and Min-jun kicks a crate into his shins to buy half a second. Elys shrieks inside his skull, left side, another one coming. Min-jun throws his satchel into the third man's face and rips free of the grab. That is when the steel finds his ribs. Not a stab, a slash, fast and shallow. But it opens a hot red line from his side to his navel, and the world goes white for a heartbeat. He stumbles back against a rain barrel, and the three men close in. Elys says she can feel the wound tearing wider every time he breathes. Min-jun tells her to shut up and hold on. He channels a pulse of the egg's ether into his legs and shoulder. Nothing big, just enough to shove the rain barrel off its stand. The barrel hits the cobbles and splits, and the sudden rush of foul water knocks the big guy off balance. Min-jun is already moving. He slips through the gap and into the warren of alleys behind the tanner's quarter. One hand clamped to his ribs, and every step a fresh argument with his body. Behind him, the knife man calls out that he's bleeding bad and won't get far, which is correct. By the time Min-jun reaches the old well behind the charcoal maker's shed, his tunic is soaked through, and his vision keeps folding at the edges. He drops to his knees beside the well, and Elys forces her way out of his collar. She's still tiny, barely the length of his forearm, but her silver scales catch the gray light, and her eyes are burning. She nuzzles against the wound and starts to glow. It's the hatchling's version of a healing breath, a thin thread of golden warmth that pulls the edges of the slash together and seals the deepest. Bleeding. It isn't enough to close the wound completely, and the effort knocks Elys flat on her side. She tells him that's all she's got for now. Min-jun scoops her into his palm and feels her tiny heartbeat hammering against his thumb. He gets 3 hours of rest in the coal shed, wrapped in stolen burlap, and when he wakes, the wound is a tight pink scar that pulls when he moves but no longer weeps. Elys is asleep in his hood, dreaming of fire and open sky. He can feel her dreams bleeding through the bond. He limps out of the shed at first light and almost walks straight into a patrol. 2 guild guards are working their way up the alley with a dog, a big mastiff with a scarred muzzle, sniffing at doorways. The dog catches his scent immediately. Min-jun turns and runs, and the guards shout for him to halt. He makes it 3 blocks before the rib scar screams at him to stop. The dog is closing, and the guards are blowing their whistles. And then a door swings open to his left, and a hand yanks him inside. The door slams shut. Min-jun finds himself in a cluttered pantry, face to face with a soldier in worn leather armor. The man is maybe 40, with a gray-streaked beard and a missing earlobe on the left side. He puts a finger to his lips. Outside, the guards thunder past with the dog, and the whistles fade. The soldier lets out a long breath and says he knows who Min-jun is. He says everyone in the lower quarter knows, the cripple with the dragon, the commander's true heir. His name is Jang Do-hyuk. He was a sergeant in Commander Kang Dae-hyun's household guard 7 years ago. He saw Hyun-seo come home the night the old man died. Min-jun asks him why he didn't speak up then. Jang Do-hyuk rolls up his sleeve and shows a burn scar that covers half his forearm. Guild enforcers paid him a visit the next morning and told him his daughter would be next. He lost everything. His rank, his pension, his family. They fled south and he hasn't seen them in 6 years. All because he saw Hyun-seo's cloak soaked in wine and smelling of necromantic reagents. Min-jun leans against the pantry shelves, and Elys stirs in his hood, her mental voice soft. She says this man is telling the truth. She can feel the old grief in his mana. Jang Do-hyuk says he's been waiting for a chance to hit back, and Min-jun showing up in his alley looking like a corpse is probably the best chance he's going to get. He knows a way out of the city that Hyun-so's hunters won't be watching. It isn't a gate or a bridge or a sewer, it's something much stranger, a collapsed portal. In the cellar of a ruined temple on the west edge of the capital, there is a stone arch that hasn't worked in a decade, and Jang Do-hyuk is one of maybe 3 people who know it exists. It leads somewhere. A dead dungeon, drained of monsters years ago. No one guards it because no one thinks it can still be used. Jang Do-hyuk says he can get Min-jun there by nightfall if he can keep his feet moving. Min-jun doesn't have a better option. They move through the city in fragments, ducking into doorways, cutting through laundry yards, freezing every time a patrol passes. Jang Do-hyuk knows the guard rotation by heart. He was a sergeant for 10 years, and he still thinks like one. By the time the sun starts to dip, they're in the old temple district, a stretch of crumbling stone buildings that predate the guilds by centuries. The temple they want is half collapsed, its roof open to the sky, and its floor buried in dead leaves. Under the altar, there's a stairway that spirals down into the dark. Jang Do-hyuk lights a torch and leads the way. The stairs go deep. At the bottom, the room opens into a cavern that smells of old stone and ozone. In the center stands the portal arch, a ring of black stone taller than 3 men, its surface webbed with cracks and glowing faintly blue at the edges. It looks dead, but it isn't. Min-jun can feel it humming in his chest, a frequency that resonates with the dragon bond. Elys pokes her head out of his hood and stares at the arch. She says she can feel something on the other side, something old. Jang Do-hyuk says the portal only works one way, and it only works if the dungeon on the far side recognizes you. He tried it once years ago, but the arch wouldn't let him through. Min-jun walks up to the stone ring and places his palm against it. The whole arch flares with silver light, and the air inside it ripples like water. Elys tells him that whatever is waiting on the other side already knows they are here. Min-jun steps through the portal. The sensation is like falling through cold smoke, and when his feet hit solid ground again, he is standing in a vast hall of black obsidian. Purple torch flame flickers along the walls, and the ceiling is so high it vanishes into shadow. At the center of the hall stands a figure made of translucent blue light, a ghost, tall and armored in archaic plate, with a greatsword planted point down before him like a judgment. The ghost opens its eyes, 2 burning motes of white, and speaks in a voice that vibrates through the stone. It asks, "Who dares enter the tomb of the dragon-blessed?" Elys crawls onto Min-jun's shoulder and flares her tiny wings. The ghost falls silent. Then it kneels. It says the dragon has returned, and it calls Min-jun by a name he has never heard in this life. The name of his past self, the legendary rider. Min-jun asks the ghost what this place is. The guardian explains that this dungeon was built centuries ago as a sanctuary for dragon riders, a place where the bond could be tested and strengthened away from the eyes of the world. It was sealed when the last rider fell, and it has been waiting ever since. The guardian has served the dragon-blessed for 1,000 years, and it knows Min-jun's soul by the shape of its scars. Elys asks if the ghost can help them reach Hyun-so. The guardian is silent for a long moment. Then it says there is a key. Long ago, the riders built teleportation circles that linked their sanctuaries to the great halls of the mortal world. One such circle was hidden inside the Kang ancestral estate, in the main hall itself, beneath the floorboards. The guardian holds the activation key. It raises one spectral hand, and a small object materializes in the air. A stone disc, etched with a dragon in flight, no larger than a coin. The guardian says this key will open the circle once, and only once. Min-jun takes the key from the ghost's palm, and the stone is warm against his fingers, pulsing with a faint heartbeat rhythm that matches Elys's own. The dungeon around them begins to fade. The obsidian walls turn transparent, and Min-jun realizes the whole place is dissolving. The guardian says the sanctuary has fulfilled its purpose, and now it will rest. The ghost, the hall, the purple torches, all of it collapses into a rush of silver wind that deposits Min-jun and Elys back at the foot of the point. Portal arch, gasping. Jang Do-hyuk catches Min-jun before he hits the ground. The stone disc is still clutched in his hand, and Elys is vibrating with excitement. She says she felt the circle's location, and it's exactly where the guardian said. In the main hall of the estate, right under Hyun-so's feet, Min-jun has a key. He has the journals. He has a way in that Hyun-so will never see coming. What he does not have is armor, weapons, or any way to survive the 30 seconds after he materializes in a room full of guild hunters. Jang Do-hyuk points out that the Harvest Festival is over, which means the estate's public-facing security is back to normal. But normal still means 20 guards, 3 detection wards, and Hyun-seo himself sleeping 2 floors above the main hall. Elys says she can sense Hyun-seo's mana from here. Even across the city, he is agitated, restless, like a man who knows the net is closing but cannot find the fish. Min-jun asks Jang Do-hyuk if there's a weaponsmith in the lower quarter who won't ask questions. Jang Do-hyuk says there's a woman named Eun-ha who runs a forge out of an old bathhouse. She owes him a favor that's 7 years overdue. Her work is ugly, but it doesn't break. By dawn, Min-jun is standing in the bathhouse forge with a breastplate that smells of coal and a long sword that's seen better decades. The breastplate is plain steel with a dent in the left shoulder and straps that have been re-sewn 3 times. The sword is a hand-me-down from a dead hunter, its edge chipped, but its balance true. Eun-ha doesn't ask who he is. She just takes Jang Do-hyuk's money and tells Min-jun not to die in her armor because it's bad for business. Min-jun straps the breastplate on over his scarred ribs, and it feels like putting on a second spine. He tucks the journals into a waterproof satchel and slings it across his chest. The stone key hangs on a cord around his neck, warm against his skin. Elys curls up inside his collar, her silver head tucked under his ear, and she tells him that she's scared. Min-jun tells her that fear is the same response to what they're about to do. Jang Do-hyuk walks him to the edge of the noble quarter and stops at the boundary line where the cobbles get smoother and the patrols get heavier. He says he's done everything he can. The rest is on Min-jun. He clasps Min-jun's forearm, soldier to soldier, and then he vanishes back into the alleys. Min-jun stands alone at the edge of the estate district. The sun is rising. In his palm, the stone key is pulsing faster now. It knows it's close to the circle. He takes a breath that aches in his healing ribs. Then he presses the key between both hands and activates it. The world lurches. Min-jun materializes in the center of the Kang estate's main hall in a column of silver fire that scorches the floorboards in a perfect circle. He is standing in full armor, sword in hand, the journals visible against his chest. Every head in the room turns. There are nobles here, a morning council meeting, 24 witnesses in silk robes, frozen mid-sentence with teacups halfway to their lips. Hyun-seo is at the head of the table, and the look on his face is something Min-jun will savor for the rest of his life. Min-jun draws the journal from his satchel and opens it to the marked page. The hall is dead silent, except for the crackle of the fading teleportation fire. He reads aloud his father's final entry, the accusation, the physician's testimony, the name of the poison, and the name of the buyer. He reads it in a voice that does not shake. My son, Hyun-seo, purchased a necromantic serum from an alchemist in the southern quarter. 3 days later, I tasted bitterness in my evening wine. The nobles gasp. One woman drops her teacup, and the shatter is deafening. Hyun-seo rises from his chair so fast it topples backward. His face twists through 3 expressions in 1 second: shock, fury, and then something colder, something calculating. He says Min-jun is a liar and a thief. He says the journals are forgeries. He orders his guards to seize the intruder. But the nobles are not moving. They're watching. And that hesitation is everything Min-jun came for. He has their attention. He has the truth in his hands. And Hyun-seo, for the first time in 7 years, does not look like an S-rank hunter in control of the room. He looks like a man watching his own legend crack. Hyun-seo's hand closes around the stem of his wineglass and crushes it into powder. Shards drop to the table like chips of ice, and the sound is the only warning anyone gets. He draws his blade in one motion, a rapier thin as a needle, mist curling off the steel. Min-jun doesn't flinch. He slides the journal back into the satchel and draws his own sword, the chipped hand-me-down that smells of coal. The nobles scramble backwards so fast they knock over chairs and each other. Someone screams, and the council meeting erupts into a stampede of silk and overturned tea trays. Hyun-seo's first strike comes faster than Min-jun can blink, an ice-laced thrust aimed at his throat. Elys shrieks a warning in his mind, and he twists, the blade slicing air an inch from his ear. He counterswings, but Hyun-seo parries with contemptuous ease, and the impact numbs his whole arm. Our boy staggers back 3 steps, and his boots crunch on the shattered teacup from earlier. Hyun-seo flicks his wrist, and 4 ice spikes form in the air around him, each one sharp as a spearhead. He sends them all at once, and Min-jun has exactly one answer. Elys surges heat through his veins, that familiar burn in his chest, and he exhales a sheet of dragon fire that melts the spikes mid-flight. Steam explodes across the hall, blinding everyone. Hyun-seo curses and swipes his hand, summoning a gust of frost to clear the air. Min-jun uses those 3 seconds to close the distance and swing for his brother's ribs. The chipped blade connects. It doesn't cut deep, Hyun-seo's armor turns most of it, but the force behind the blow sends him stumbling into the council table. A gold candelabra tips and rolls, and Hyun-seo catches himself on one knee. He looks up with murder in his eyes, and the temperature in the hall drops 20 degrees. Frost crawls up the marble pillars and cracks the wood of the floorboards. Min-jun's breath fogs in front of his face, and his fingers go stiff on the sword grip. Elys pours more heat into him, pushing back the cold, but he can feel her straining already. That's when Hyun-seo lunges again, faster this time, and the rapier scores a line across Min-jun's shoulder, right through the dented breastplate. Pain lances down his arm, hot and bright, but he doesn't drop the sword. He pivots and slams the pommel into Hyun-seo's jaw, and the crack echoes off the vaulted ceiling. Hyun-seo's head snaps sideways. He spits blood onto the floorboards and turns back with a grin that's all teeth. His cheek is split open, a thin red line from cheekbone to chin, and Min-jun put it there. The nobles who haven't fled are pressed against the walls, and they're watching this fight like it's a gladiator pit. Hyun-seo straightens his collar and sheathes his rapier, and the sudden calm is more terrifying than the ice spikes. He looks at Min-jun and says something that our boy does not expect at all. He admits the journal is real, every word of it. The nobles gasp again, but Hyun-seo isn't finished. He tells them that the council already knows about the DragonEgg. They've known since the day of the marketplace incident, and the council, he says, does not want the truth exposed. They want the dragon for themselves. Min-jun's blood runs cold, and not from Hyun-seo's magic. He scans the faces of the nobles still in the room, and not one of them meets his eyes. That's when the side doors slam open, and a dozen council guards pour in, armored, armed, and surrounding Min-jun in a ring of steel. Hyun-seo spreads his hands like a reasonable man offering terms. He says Min-jun can walk out of here alive if he hands over the dragon. He can even keep the family name, the estate, a comfortable exile somewhere warm and far away. All he has to do is surrender Elys. Elys trembles inside Min-jun's collar, and he can feel her fear like ice water in his veins. She tells him she'd rather die than be a weapon for these men. Min-jun's answer to Hyun-seo is 3 words, and none of them are polite. He says no. And then he says something else that really sets the room on fire. He tells the nobles they are complicit in murder, and history will remember them as cowards who traded justice for a lizard. Hyun-seo's smile vanishes. He gives the order, and the guards charge from every direction at once. Elys doesn't wait for Min-jun to ask. She explodes out of his collar and breathes a cone of silver fire that blinds the first rank of guards. They reel back, clawing at their faces, and Min-jun uses the gap. He feints left, then vaults over the council table, scattering scrolls and wine flasks in a cascade of parchment and red. The window at the far end of the hall is 2 stories tall, paned in colored glass that depicts the Kang family crest. He's heading straight for it. 2 guards intercept him, and he shoulder checks the first one into the second, sending both of them crashing into a suit of ancestral armor that collapses in a clatter of iron. Hyun-seo screams at the archers on the gallery, and crossbow bolts start raining down from above. One buries itself in the floorboards, inches from Min-jun's heel. Another grazes his calf, and the leg buckles, but he keeps moving. Elys shrinks back into his collar and pumps every last spark of mana she has into his legs. He feels the heat surge through his thighs and calves, and suddenly he's running faster than he's ever run in this life. The stained glass window rushes toward him like the surface of a lake. He tucks his head, wraps both arms around his chest to shield Elys, and launches himself through the glass. The world is a shatter of color, and then a roar of wind. He falls 2 stories and hits the garden hedge with a crunch that knocks the air out of him completely. Branches and thorns claw at his armor as he rolls off the hedge and lands flat on his back in the grass. Above him, through the broken window, he can see Hyun-seo's silhouette framed against the candlelight. And the rage in that silhouette is a physical thing. Guards are already pouring out of the estate's side doors, torches flaring in the pre-dawn dark. Min-jun forces himself upright, gasping, and Elys whimpers that she's almost empty. She has 1 tiny flame left, maybe 2. He tells her to save it. Then he turns and runs for the estate wall, and behind him, the hunt begins. They clear the wall by a drainage ditch that smells like something died in it, but Min-jun is past caring about smells. He slides through the iron grate, drops into the alley on the other side, and keeps running until the shouts fade and the torches are just pinpricks in the distance. Dawn finds him collapsed in a ditch outside the city gates, covered in hedge scratches and dried blood from the crossbow graze. Elys crawls out of his collar and licks his cheek, and her tongue is rough as a cat's and warm as a hearth. She says they need to leave the capital. Not just the estate, not just the noble quarter, the whole city. Hyunso will burn every house in Valtara to find them now. Min-jun stares at the sky, which is turning pink and gold above the distant walls, and he knows she's right. The journal is still in his satchel, but the truth wasn't enough. The nobles chose power over justice, and Min-jun has nothing left in this city but enemies. He pushes himself up on his elbows and asks Elys where they should go. Elys closes her eyes and reaches out with that strange dragon sense of hers, feeling the mana currents that flow through the land. She says there's a place to the north, past the Thornwood, and up into the Iron Fang Mountains, an old nesting ground. She doesn't know how she knows this. It's buried somewhere in her inherited memory, a fragment of the ancient dragons who came before her. But she knows one thing for certain. If they can reach that place, she can grow. Min-jun gets to his feet, adjusts the satchel, and starts walking north. There's no road, no wagon, and no potion seller disguise this time. Just 2 fugitives and a wilderness full of monsters. The Thornwood is every bit as welcoming as its name suggests. The trees grow so thick that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor, and the brambles have thorns the length of Min-jun's thumb. By midday, his arms are crisscrossed with scratches, and his boots are already wearing thin. Elys rides on his shoulder, her silver eyes scanning the shadows, and she warns him when she senses movement in the underbrush. The first thing that tries to eat them is a thornback wolf, a gaunt, spined thing with amber eyes and a jaw that unhinges like a snake's. It lunges from a hollow log, and Min-jun barely gets his sword up in time. The wolf's teeth clamp down on the blade instead of his throat, and the two of them crash into the ferns in a tangle of steel and fur. Min-jun drives his knee into the wolf's ribs and twists the sword, and the creature yelps and scrambles back. Elys hits it with a puff of fire, not enough to kill, but it singes the spines along its back, and the wolf decides this meal isn't worth the trouble. It slinks away into the shadows, and Min-jun lies in the ferns for a full minute, just breathing. They make camp that night under an overhang of rock, and Min-jun doesn't dare light a fire. Elys curls up against his neck and tells him stories from the egg memory. Tales of ancient dragons who carved mountains with their claws and sang storms into existence. He falls asleep to the sound of her voice and the distant howl of wolves. The next morning they find a stream, and Min-jun drinks until his stomach aches. He fills a water skin he took from a dead guard's belt during the escape, and Elys dips her whole head into the water and comes up sputtering silver droplets everywhere. She looks proud of herself, and Min-jun laughs for the first time since the vault. He laughs until his ribs hurt, and then he keeps laughing anyway. They follow the stream north for 3 days. Each day, Elys grows a fraction. Nothing dramatic, but she's heavier on his shoulder now, and her neck is longer, and her wing buds have started to sprout real membrane. She learns to hunt for herself, snatching fat streamfish with her tiny claws and swallowing them whole. Min-jun practices with the sword against dead trees and boulders, rebuilding the muscle memory that the old dragon rider in his soul remembers. He's still a long way from the warrior he once was, but he's not the crippled stable boy anymore either. On the 4th day, the Thornwood thins, and the ground begins to slope upward. The Iron Fang Mountains rise ahead of them, gray and forbidding, their peaks lost in permanent cloud. And at the base of the first real cliff, blocking the only path forward, stands a creature that stops Min-jun in his tracks. It's a dragon. Not a wyvern, not a drake, a true dragon, spectral and silver, its body half-transparent like a ghost made of moonlight. Its eyes burn with ancient intelligence, and when it speaks, the voice resonates in Min-jun's skull. It asks why a mortal and a hatchling dare approach the nesting ground. It says that only the dragon-blessed may pass, and if he is not worthy, the mountain will claim his bones. Elys puffs up her chest and growls at the spectral dragon, and the sound is so absurdly small and fierce that Min-jun almost smiles. But he knows this is not a fight he can win with a sword. He drops to one knee and tells the guardian that he was a rider once, in another life. He opens his mind and shows the spectral dragon the memories Elys gave him. The past life bond, the betrayal, the egg that refused to die. The guardian is silent for a long moment, and then it steps aside, and the cliff face behind it shimmers and reveals a passage that wasn't there before. A cave mouth, glowing faintly blue, and inside it the sound of wind and the smell of old magic. The spectral dragon tells Min-jun that the trial is ahead, and it will show him the thing he fears most. Min-jun stands up, tightens the strap on his satchel, and walks toward the cave with Elys clinging to his shoulder. He doesn't know what's waiting inside, but he knows that facing it is the only way to make Elys strong enough to survive what's coming next. Min-jun steps into the blue-lit cave, and the entrance seals shut behind him. The darkness is absolute for about 3 seconds, Then the walls ignite with ancient runes, and the whole tunnel pulses like a throat. Elys digs her claws into his shoulder and mutters that she doesn't like this place. Our boy doesn't either, but he keeps walking anyway. The tunnel opens into a vast underground chamber with a ceiling so high it vanishes into shadow. In the center of the floor, a pool of silver liquid sits perfectly still, reflecting nothing. And standing on the surface of that pool, as if it were solid glass, is a man. The man wears armor that Min-jun knows intimately because he wore it himself in another life. Dragon-scale pauldrons, a crimson cloak, and the helm shaped like a snarling worm. The figure lifts its visor, and Min-jun is staring at his own face, younger, prouder, and already dead. This is the trial, and the Guardian wasn't kidding about showing him the thing he fears most. The vision speaks in a voice that echoes off the stone, asking why a failure dares to enter the nesting ground. It says that a true rider protects his dragon, but Min-jun got his bondmate killed. The scene behind the armored figure flickers, and suddenly Min-jun can see it. The final battle of his past life. He watches himself charge across a burning battlefield on a great silver dragon that dwarfs anything in this age. He watches the rival's ambush spring from the clouds, a dozen ice lances punching through dragonhide. He watches the dragon scream and fall, and he watches himself tumble from the saddle into darkness. The vision turns back to him and asks the same question again. Why should he be allowed to try twice? Elys is trembling on his shoulder, her tiny body vibrating with a growl that's half fear and half fury. Min-jun doesn't look away from his own dead eyes. He tells the vision that he's not the same man who fell from that saddle. The man in the vision laughs and says that words are cheap and bones don't forget. Then he draws the sword at his hip, a blade of black dragon glass that Min-jun remembers breaking in that final fight. The vision attacks. Min-jun barely gets his own sword up in time, and the impact sends a shockwave rippling across the silver pool. The vision fights exactly like Min-jun remembers fighting, aggressive, precise, arrogant. Every strike is a killing blow aimed at the throat or the heart, and the first exchange drives Min-jun back 3 steps. He's out of practice, and his body is still half-healed, and the vision knows it. A cut slips past his guard and slices his forearm, and the blood hits the silver pool and hisses into steam. Elys shrieks and launches off his shoulder, breathing a tiny flame at the vision's face. The vision backhands her out of the air, and she tumbles across the stone and lies still. Min-jun's vision goes red. He charges. He abandons every defensive instinct and swings with nothing but rage. And for 3 wild strikes, he actually pushes the vision back. But the vision sidesteps the 4th strike and drives the pommel into Min-jun's ribs, and he drops to one knee, wheezing. The vision stands over him and says that rage didn't save his dragon then, and it won't save the hatchling now. It raises the sword for the killing stroke, and Min-jun finally understands what he's supposed to do. He doesn't block. He drops his sword and reaches up with his bare hand and catches the descending blade. The dragon glass edge bites into his palm and stops a finger's width from his skull. Blood runs down his arm, but he holds it there, and he looks the vision in the eyes. Min-jun says that the man he was failed because he fought alone. He says he tried to be the hero, the legend, the rider who needed no one. He says he's done being that man. He tells the vision that he's got a hatchling who talks back, and a soldier who risked his neck for a stranger, and a noblewoman who offered him a job when he was a cripple. He's not alone anymore, and he won't fight like he is. The vision stares at him for a long, silent moment. Then it smiles. It actually smiles. It pulls the sword from Min-jun's grip and sheathes it, and the silver pool beneath them begins to ripple. The chamber goes dark again, and when the light returns, the vision is gone. And Min-jun is kneeling alone with his bleeding hand and his dragonette stirring groggily on the stone. Elys wobbles to her feet, shakes her head, and telepathically asks if she missed the good part. Min-jun laughs until his cracked ribs scream at him. Then he stands up, wraps a strip of cloth around his palm, and picks Elys up. The runes on the walls brighten, and the silver pool begins to drain, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. This was only the first part of the trial, and now the real ritual chamber waits below. The staircase goes down a long way. Min-jun counts 100 steps, then 200. Then he stops counting because it's messing with his head. The air gets warmer the deeper they go, and the stone walls start sweating a pale silver condensation. Elys laps at a drip on the wall, and her eyes flash brighter for a second. She says the magic here is old, older than the egg memory. At the bottom, the staircase opens into a circular chamber carved from obsidian and veined with lines of molten silver that pulse like a heartbeat. In the center of the chamber, a stone altar shaped like a coiled dragon holds a single object, a chalice made from the skull of a long-dead worm. Min-jun knows what he's supposed to do because the knowledge just appears in his head the moment he looks at the altar. The bond ritual. It's not something you can half do. Once it starts, either the bond deepens permanently or both dragon and rider die right there on the stone. Elys looks at the chalice and then looks at Min-jun, and he can feel her fear through the link, but also her resolve. She's not going to back out, and neither is he. He cuts his already wounded palm with a shard of obsidian from the wall and lets the blood pool in the worm skull cup. Then he lifts the chalice to Elys's mouth, and she drinks. The effect is immediate and violent. Min-jun's spine arches, and he drops to his knees as every nerve in his body catches fire at once. The bond is deepening, yes, but it's also erasing the barrier between his soul and hers. And that barrier was the only thing keeping his body from burning through its lifespan like kindling. He watches the skin on the back of his hands tighten and crease. He feels the lines etching deeper around his eyes. He tastes iron and ash on his tongue. A lock of his hair falls across his face, and it's not the pale gray he's used to from overusing the egg's power this time. The whole strand is silver white, not just a streak. An entire decade stripped out of him, and the ritual isn't even halfway done. Elys is screaming through the telepathic bond, but it's not pain she's feeling. She's growing. Her body lengthens on the altar stone, the hatchling fuzz burning away as true silver scales erupt across her hide. Her wing buds split and unfurl, membranes stretching between bone struts that grow from finger length to the span of a man's arms in 6 seconds flat. Her neck extends and thickens, and her jaw cracks and reshapes as her milk teeth are forced out by a row of dagger-sharp fangs. The chamber fills with silver light so bright that Min-jun can't see, and for one long moment he's suspended in white nothing. Then the light snaps back, and he's lying on the cold stone of the altar, and a creature he's never seen before is standing over him. A drake, silver-scaled, sleek-bodied, with fully formed wings that gleam like polished armor. She's bigger than a warhorse now, and her snout could swallow a man's head whole. And her eyes, those same silver eyes, are looking at him with an intelligence that's entirely new. Elys tilts her massive head and asks him, telepathically, if he's going to lie there all day, or if he wants to see what she can do now that she's awesome. Min-jun pushes himself upright, and his body protests every inch of the way, but he's grinning anyway. He looks down at his hands, a decade older, calloused and scarred, and looking like they belong to a man who's done some living. And then he looks up at the creature his dragon has become. Elys spreads her wings and takes a running leap, and she actually flies. Not a glide, not a flutter, but real powered flight that circles the ritual chamber twice before she lands with a ground-shaking thud. She opens her great silver jaws and breathes a stream of fire that hits the obsidian wall and melts a trench 3 feet deep into the stone. Ah, so that's what a bonded drake can do. They climb out of the ritual chamber through a different passage, one that slopes upward toward daylight, and Min-jun's mind is already racing. Ahead. The journal is still in his satchel. Hyun-so is still in the capital. The nobles are still hunting them. But the math has changed now. Elys isn't a secret he has to hide anymore. She's a weapon. Min-jun reaches the cave mouth, and the spectral guardian is standing there, watching. It tells him one last thing before it fades. It says, the nesting ground is open to him now. He can call on the old magic when he needs it, but the price will always be the same. Nothing is free in the dragon's domain. Then the guardian dissolves into moonlight, and Min-jun is standing in the gray mountain dawn with a drake at his side, and his youth traded for firepower. He doesn't feel like hiding anymore, and he doesn't feel like running. What he feels, for the first time since the vault, is ready. Min-jun tells Elys they're not going back to the capital to sneak around this time. They're going to hit the guild headquarters directly, and they're going to tear down every brick of Hyun-seo's power on the way. Elys snorts a puff of smoke and says she's been waiting for him to figure that out. They start walking down from the Iron Fang Mountains, and the ground shakes a little every time Elys takes a step, and the wildlife clears out of their path for a half-mile in every direction. No thornback wolves this time. No dire boars. Nothing wants to be anywhere near a dragon that just hit drake size, and Min-jun can't blame the local monsters one bit. By the second day on the road, word has already started spreading. They pass a merchant caravan going the opposite direction, and the guards take one look at Elys and go pale. Min-jun doesn't threaten them, he just waves, and Elys gives them a little puff of smoke from her nostrils, and the caravan master drops to his knees and offers them supplies. The dragon's reputation is going to arrive at the capital before they do, and that's exactly what Min-jun wants. Let Hyun-so panic. Let the nobles who tried to steal his dragon sweat a little. He's done with shadows and sewers and rat tunnels. This time, he's walking through the front gate. But an army isn't built from one man and one dragon, even a dragon as magnificent as Elys. On the fourth day, skirting the edge of the Thornwood, they run into trouble, or trouble runs into them, depending on how you look at it. A bandit camp, dug into an old fortress ruin on a hill, with watchtowers manned by archers and a spiked palisade around the perimeter. About 40 fighters in total, by Min-jun's quick count. They've been preying on the trade road that leads to the mountain passes, and from the look of their fortifications, they've been doing it for a while. The bandits spot Elys from a mile out. By the time Min-jun reaches hailing distance, the whole camp is lined up on the palisade, weapons drawn. And nobody is shooting because nobody wants to be the idiot who starts a fight with a dragon. Min-jun stops 50 paces from the gate and tells them he's not here to rob them. He tells them he's heading for the capital to settle a score with the guilds. He says anyone with a grudge against Hyun-soo and his hunters is welcome to march with him. The bandit leader, a scarred woman with half an ear missing and a war axe on her shoulder, climbs down from the palisade and walks right up to them. She looks at Min-jun's silver-streaked hair. She looks at the journal bulging in his satchel. Then she looks at Elys. She says that if the dragon vouches for him, that's good enough for her. Her name is Yano, and her crew has been fighting the guilds for years over territory, and she's lost a lot of people to Hyun-seo's hunters. She spits on the ground and says she'll follow a dragon rider to the capital if it means she gets to swing her axe at something that matters. By nightfall, Min-jun has 43 bandits sworn to his banner, or rather, to Elys's banner, since most of them are more impressed by the dragon than the man, and they're marching east with a speed that surprises even him. The bandits know every trail through the Thornwood, every shortcut, every place to ford a river without being seen. With their help, Min-jun reaches the outskirts of the capital in under a week. The guild headquarters of the Stormbringers stands on a fortified island in the middle of the river that cuts through the city's northern district. 3 bridges connect it to the mainland, each one guarded by a gatehouse and a full squad of hunters. It's the most defensible position in the capital, and Hyun-seo has made it his seat of power. Min-jun stands on a rooftop in the merchant quarter, looking at those gates, and makes his plan. They hit at dawn. Elys flies over the river and melts the first gate. Not a little fireball this time, but a full Drake stream that turns iron to slag in under a minute. The guards on the gatehouse don't even have time to sound an alarm before the bridge is open, and Yano's bandits are pouring across it, screaming war cries and brandishing stolen guild weapons. The Stormbringers scramble. Hunters pour out of the barracks in half-fastened armor, and the courtyard erupts into chaos. Bandits against hunters, steel against steel, and above it all, a silver drake circling and breathing fire into any formation that tries to rally. Min-jun leads the charge on foot, cutting down 2 hunters in the initial push, and his sword feels right in his hands now, not the desperate flailing of a fugitive, but the clean, efficient strikes of a man who remembers how to fight. They take the first gate in less than 10 minutes. The bandits are howling victory, and Yano's axe is dripping red, and they're pushing toward the second bridge when the real counterattack arrives. Hyun-seo doesn't come personally. He's too smart for that, not with a dragon in the air, but he sends something almost as dangerous. The ground beneath the second bridge cracks open, and from that fissure rises a shadow worm, a creature of black smoke and necromantic hunger, its eyeless head swaying, and its maw dripping void stuff that eats through stone like acid. It's a summoned beast, not a natural one. Min-jun can feel the necromancy rolling off it in waves. Hyun-seo's been holding back some nasty tricks, and this particular trick is about 30 feet long and very, very hungry. The worm lunges, and the first rank of bandits simply vanishes, swallowed by the shadow mass before they can even scream. Yano yells for her people to fall back, but there's nowhere to fall back to. The first bridge is behind them, and the worm has them pinned. Elys dives, breathing fire into the creature's flank, and the flame does damage, but not enough. The worm's shadow flesh reforms as fast as it burns. Min-jun tightens his grip on his sword and runs toward the thing instead of away from it, because he's got exactly one idea, and it's a terrible one. Min-jun doesn't slow down. He shouts through the bond one word: Elys. She already knows. The silver drake banks hard mid-air and folds her wings. She plummets like a meteor. The shadow worm is too busy swallowing bandits to notice. Big mistake. Elys slams into its right wing membrane from above. Her jaws lock onto the shadow flesh and rip upward. The worm shrieks so loud the bridge stones crack. It rears back, its eyeless head thrashing. It can't turn far enough to bite her. That gives our boy his window. Min-jun vaults over a shattered barricade and sprints straight at the thing's flank. He doesn't have a grapple, he doesn't need one. He uses a fallen hunter's shield as a springboard and launches himself onto the worm's spine. The shadow cold bites through his boots instantly. His skin numbs. He doesn't care. He grabs a ridge of black bone and pulls himself higher. The worm bucks. He nearly slips, but Elys clamps down harder on the wing, anchoring it. Min-jun crawls toward the skull. Void stuff drips past him, eating holes in the stone below. He reaches what passes for a neck joint and drives his sword in with both hands. The blade sinks halfway and stops. That's when he channels the dragon's ether. His veins glow silver under his skin. The sword ignites. He forces it deeper, and the worm's shriek becomes a gurgle. Black smoke erupts from the wound. The whole creature starts to unravel. Its form collapses into a fog bank of necrotic mist, and Min-jun drops 10 feet onto the bridge. He lands on one knee. Elys lands beside him, chest heaving, smoke curling from her nostrils. The worm is gone. Our boy stands up slowly. The silver in his hair has spread another half-inch. He doesn't care about that either. The bandits are screaming. Yano waves her axe and howls something profane. The few hunters left on the rampart are staring at the empty space where the worm used to be. They're not fighting anymore. Some of them are backing away. Some of them drop their weapons. It's over. Or it should be. The temperature drops 20 degrees in a heartbeat. Ice crystals form on every surface. Min-jun's breath fogs. Elys snarls. And from the main keep's broken archway, Hyun-seo walks out. No armor, just his usual pristine tunic. He's smiling that perfect politician smile. He looks at the dead worm, then at Min-jun, then at the dragon. He asks if his little brother really thought a summoned pet was enough. Min-jun doesn't answer. He just tightens his grip. Hyun-seo raises one hand. A dozen ice spears materialize around him. He flicks his wrist. They launch. Min-jun dodges left, rolls, and comes up swinging. Elys breathes a stream of fire that melts 3 spears in mid-air. Min-jun closes the distance. Their swords meet on the edge of the second bridge's rampart, right where the stone was cracked by the worm's death. The ground shifts under them. The whole balcony groans. Neither of them stops. Hyun-seo's blade is a rapier of frozen mana, and every strike leaves a trail of frost. Min-jun parries and counters. Ice shards fly. Dragonfire answers. They fight back and forth across the crumbling walkway, and the bandits and hunters below can only watch. This is S-rank territory. Nobody else can even get close. Min-jun is faster now than he was at the ballroom. The bond has sharpened him. He reads Hyun-seo's rhythm, the little tell before every thrust, the way his left foot shifts before a big spell. He doesn't react to it. He waits. He lets his guard sag on purpose. His sword dips. Hyun-seo's eyes flicker with triumph. He lunges, going for the kill, and that's exactly what Min-jun wanted. He twists sideways, lets the rapier slide past his ribs, and stabs Hyun-seo through the gut. Clean, deep. The blade punches out the back of his tunic. Hyun-seo chokes. Min-jun looks him in the eye and tells him it's over. But the body doesn't fall. Hyun-seo's smile doesn't waver. A charm around his neck glows with a sick green light. The wound seals itself in under 3 seconds. Hyun-seo laughs. He says Min-jun really thought he'd come to this fight without insurance. He shoves Min-jun backward with an ice burst. Min-jun skids across the stone. Elys roars and fires, but Hyun-seo is already stepping back, pulling a black stone from his belt. A portal stone. Min-jun knows it the second he sees it. He lunges, but he's too late. The portal opens behind Hyun-seo, a swirling rift of necrotic green. Hyun-seo steps halfway through and turns back. He's still laughing. He tells Min-jun he'll never find his true master. He says the game is bigger than one dead father and one stupid dragon. Then the rift closes, a flash of green. Silence. Hyun-seo is gone. Min-jun stands on the ruined bridge, sword still dripping his brother's blood. The rampart crumbles another inch. Yano scrambles up and grabs his shoulder. She asks if he's alive. He doesn't answer right away. He looks at the empty air where the portal was, and then he looks at the guild headquarters behind it. All of it is his now. The fortress, the hunters who surrendered. The name. He won, technically. The bandits sweep the compound. They round up the remaining Stormbringers and disarm them. Nobody puts up a fight. By noon, Yano is directing the cleanup, and the captured officers are kneeling in the courtyard. Min-jun walks among them. He doesn't gloat. He doesn't need to. He just tells them the guild has a new master. Most of them nod. They've seen the dragon. They know how this goes. But Min-jun isn't staying. He asks the ranking officer who has ships. 2 captains step forward. One of them is a scarred woman with a naval coat and a missing finger. The other is a lanky man who looks like he's been seasick his whole life. They both swear they'll follow the dragon rider. Min-jun tells them to prepare a vessel. He's not asking. He has the journal. He has Elys. He has a brother who serves someone else, someone who's been pulling strings this whole time, and he knows where to look. Hyun Seo's master is out there, across the sea, in a place the guild's old maps mark with a simple warning, the Shrouded Isle. So our boy doesn't rest. He doesn't celebrate. He spends the night loading supplies and reviewing the maps with Elys perched on the table, her tail flicking. The two captains, Eunjung and Baro, get 3 ships ready by dawn. Min-jun leaves Yano in charge of the fortress, with enough gold to pay her people for a year. She tells him to come back alive. He says he'll try. The fleet casts off with the tide. 3 ships, 40 sailors, 1 dragon, and a man who looks 30 but carries the weight of 2 lifetimes. Elys doesn't ride below deck. She flies overhead, a silver shape against the gray sky. Min-jun stands at the prow and watches the capital shrink behind him. The voyage is quiet for 2 days. Then the mist hits. It comes out of nowhere on the 2nd afternoon. One moment the sea is clear. The next, a wall of white fog rolls over them so thick that Min-jun can't see the ship's own mast. The crew panics. Eunjung shouts orders. Baro calls for lanterns. Nothing cuts through it. Min-jun calls to Elys. She drops lower, and her scales cut a silver arc through the fog. He tells her to light the way. She opens her jaws. A tight stream of dragon fire punches a tunnel through the mist. It's not perfect, it's not safe, but it's enough. They follow the flame. Hour after hour, Elys burns a path forward, and the ships inch through the white void. The mist smells of old graves and wet stone. On the 3rd day, an island rises out of the fog. It's black rock and dead trees, and a shore littered with the wreckage of ships that didn't have a dragon to guide them. A massive stone archway yawns at the waterline. It looks like a mouth. Min-jun steps onto the wet sand. The necromancy is so thick here that his skin crawls. Elys lands beside him, and her voice cuts into his mind. She tells him the master is inside. She can feel him. He's been waiting. Min-jun draws his sword and walks toward the arch. The real fight hasn't even started. The tunnel opens into a cavern the size of a cathedral. The air tastes like copper and old bones. Min-jun stops just inside the entrance and lets his eyes adjust. Elys lands on his shoulder, and her claws dig in hard. She sends him a single word: wrong. He already knows. The walls are lined with carved pillars, each one a twisted human figure frozen in black stone. Min-jun steps closer to the nearest pillar and touches the stone. It's warm, too warm, and it pulses. A faint, wet heartbeat under his palm. He pulls his hand back fast. These aren't statues. They're prisoners. Or they were. Now they're just husks, drained dry and left standing as decorations. Elys growls low in her throat. A green light flickers at the base of each pillar, and Min-jun feels something pull at his chest. Not physically. Deeper. It's like a hook caught behind his ribs, tugging his life force toward the stone. He stumbles back a step, but the pull follows him. So do the lights. Every totem in the cavern flares brighter the longer he stands there. Elys hisses and spreads her wings, and a shimmer of silver fire washes over them both. The pull eases. Not gone, just held at arm's length. He thanks her and moves deeper into the chamber, fast now. The totems line both sides of a wide stone path that leads to a raised dais at the far end. On the dais sits a throne carved from obsidian and wrapped in chains. And the chains are moving. They slither over the armrests like snakes, slow and hungry. Min-jun draws his sword. The blade hums with residual dragonfire, and the nearest totem dims in response. Good. He keeps walking. Every step costs him. His hair grays another shade. A line cuts deeper at the corner of his mouth. But he's been running on borrowed time since the day he first summoned the egg. He's not about to stop now. The pull from the totems spikes as he reaches the dais steps, and Elys shrieks. Her fire gutters. Min-jun spins just in time to see her wings falter. The totems are focusing on her now. Of course they are. A dragon's life force burns 1,000 times brighter than a man's. She's a feast to them. He grabs her off his shoulder and tucks her against his chest, wraps his cloak around her, and pours his own mana into a barrier. The drain hits him like a hammer. His knees buckle. He keeps one hand on his sword and one arm around his dragon, and he climbs. One step. His vision narrows to a gray tunnel. He reaches the top of the dais and slams his sword point down into the stone. The dragonfire in the blade surges, a bright pulse that cracks the nearest totem. The green light in it sputters and dies. The pressure on his chest drops by half. He's got a way to fight back now, but he can already count the gray in his reflection. Another 3 pulses, and he won't have enough juice left to swing the sword. He doesn't need 3, he just needs 1 good swing aimed at the right thing. He scans the dais, and that's when the skull appears. It doesn't float in from the shadows, it's just suddenly there, hanging in the air above the obsidian throne like it's always been watching. A human skull, adult male, with a jaw that unhinges in a slow, creaking grin. Green fire fills the sockets. Min-jun tightens his grip on the sword. The skull's voice hits his mind directly, and it's not telepathy like Elys. It's a cold slime oozing into his thoughts. It calls him the Little Dragon King. It says it's been waiting for him, and it's disappointed. Min-jun asks who it is. The jaw clacks twice. A laugh. It tells him he came all this way and doesn't even know the name of his real enemy. Then the fire in the sockets dies, and a body begins to form beneath the skull. Bone knitting to bone, muscle wrapping the frame, skin sealing it shut. In 3 seconds, a figure stands before him. It's tall and gaunt, draped in robes that drip black liquid. Green runes pulse along its arms and throat. The face is smooth and ageless, and the eyes are the same flat green as the totem lights. Min-jun knows a lich when he sees one. The Shadow Lord bows, not to him, to the throne. Then it turns its head toward Min-jun and delivers the line. He killed the old general, not ordered it, not helped, did it himself with a blade made of shadow in the general's own bedchamber, while Hyun-seo was 3 cities away attending a council banquet. Min-jun's sword arm goes rigid. The Shadow Lord tilts its head and keeps talking. Hyun-seo was a useful idiot, ambitious, jealous, easy to nudge, but he never had the spine for patricide. The lich needed the general removed because the old man was getting close to exposing the island, so it killed him, burned the evidence, and left enough clues to point at the second son. Min-jun's voice comes out like gravel. He asks why. The Shadow Lord gestures at the cavern around them, at the totems, at the chains. It says it needed a dragon rider. Not a weak one. A rider forged in betrayal and pain, and desperate enough to bond with a dying egg. Min-jun was the test subject. Hyun-seo was the bait. The entire war between the brothers was a laboratory. The lich's grin widens. It thanks Min-jun for playing his part so perfectly. Then it says it will take the dragon now. Min-jun doesn't let it finish. He lunges. The dragonfire in the blade screams as he swings a horizontal cut at the lich's throat. The Shadow Lord flicks 2 fingers. The stone floor under Min-jun's feet turns to liquid shadow, and he drops. Elys shrieks and claws at his tunic, and he throws her upward with everything he's got. She catches air, her wings beating hard, and she clears the edge of the pit. But Min-jun falls. The sword slips from his grasp and clatters somewhere above him. The hole closes over his head like a throat swallowing. He hits stone, hard. Pain spikes through his ribs, and for a second the world is just black, and the sound of his own ragged breathing. He rolls onto his back and sees a thin crack of green light high above. 40 feet, at least. The walls are smooth obsidian, slick with that same black liquid the lich's robes were dripping. No handholds, no ledges. Above him he hears Elys's fire. Short bursts, a shriek, then her voice in his head, raw and scared. She can't reach him. The lich is holding her off with tendrils of shadow, and she's burning through them, but more keep coming. She tells him she's coming. He tells her to stay back, to fly, to not let it touch her. She doesn't listen. He knew she wouldn't. He forces himself to his feet and starts looking for a way out. That's when the wraiths come. They seep out of the walls like black condensation, dozens of them. Translucent bodies and hollow eye sockets, and hands that end in hooked claws of pure shadow. They don't make a sound, they just surround him. Above, the Shadow Lord's voice drips into his skull again. It tells him not to struggle. The soul drain will be quick, quicker than what it did to his father. Min-jun bares his teeth and puts his back to the wall. The wraiths close in. The first one lunges, and he sidesteps and drives his fist through its chest. His hand passes straight through. It doesn't hurt it. But it does hurt him. The cold of the wraith's body burns. His skin goes numb from knuckles to elbow. He pulls back, and his fingers won't close. The wraiths don't wait. They swarm. A claw rakes his back. Another hooks into his shoulder. Each touch drains a sliver of warmth, a sliver of life, and his body gets slower. His vision blurs at the edges. He throws a punch, then a kick, and nothing connects. The wraiths are laughing now, a thin, high sound like wind through a skull. Above the pit, the lich begins the drain spell. Min-jun feels it start. The totems in the cavern above scream in unison, and a column of green light pours down through the crack and envelops him. Every nerve in his body catches fire. He drops to one knee. The wraiths press in, and their claws dig into his spine, his ribs, the back of his neck. They're pulling his soul out, piece by piece. He can feel it fraying. And then, in the middle of all that cold and pain, the egg bond wakes up. He didn't call it. He's too weak to call anything. But it wakes anyway, because the bond is a two-way street, and Elys is not letting him die. Her fire slams into the lich above, a full-throated stream of silver, and the distraction buys him half a second. That's enough. The egg imprint buried in his soul cracks open. Not the dragon, the imprint. The thing that's been with him since the temple, since the ritual, since he was a rider in another life and a forgotten legend. It floods him with raw draconic ether, and his body starts to change. His right arm ignites, not fire, transformation. The skin ripples and hardens. Silver scales push through the flesh from wrist to shoulder in a wave of liquid metal. His fingers lengthen. His nails become talons, black and sharp as obsidian. The pain is enormous, but it's his pain, not something being stolen from him, and that makes all the difference. He screams, and the scream comes out wrong. Half human, half something much older. The wraiths recoil. The green light of the drain spell flickers. Min-jun plants his new talons into the obsidian wall, and they sink in like the stone is soft cheese. He pulls himself up. His second change hits as he climbs. The ether in his blood concentrates between his shoulder blades, and two bursts of silver fire erupt from his back. They bleed heat and light, and then they fold, and then they're not fire anymore. Their wings, draconic, scaled, translucent in places, the membrane shot through with veins of molten silver. They're not fully physical. They're constructs of pure bonded energy, and they burn with a light that turns the nearest wraiths to smoke on contact. Min-jun doesn't stop to admire them. He reaches the lip of the pit and claws his way over the edge. The wraiths scattered below him are reforming, but slow now and fewer. The totems feeding them have dimmed. The Shadow Lord turns. Its face is still that smooth, ageless mask, but the green runes on its arms are pulsing faster, and the grin is gone. Min-jun stands, and the wings flare wide, and the draconic arm sheds a few stray scales that clink on the stone like coins. The lich opens its mouth to speak. Min-jun doesn't let it. He crosses the distance in one beat of his wings, and his talons close on the lich's throat. The Shadow Lord's body dissolves into shadow the instant he touches it, and the lich reforms 20 feet to the left. It raises both hands. A wall of green flame roars up between them. Min-jun punches through it. The heat licks at his scales, but the scales don't burn. The wraiths that were regrouping in the corner of the cavern see him coming, and they scatter. He vaporizes 3 of them with a single sweep of his wings. The rest flee into the cracks in the walls. The lich watches him with those flat green eyes, and for the first time, there's something in its posture that isn't mockery. Min-jun roars. It's not a word, it's a sound that shakes dust from the ceiling, and somewhere in the cavern below, a smaller roar answers him. Elys. She's alive. He feels her rising, her fire beating back the shadows that tried to trap her. She bursts out of a side tunnel with her scales glowing and her jaws wide, and a stream of silver flame cuts across the lich's flank. The Shadow Lord hisses. The wound smokes. It doesn't regenerate. Dragonfire is not shadow. Dragonfire is the one thing in this world the lich cannot absorb. The lich retreats toward the obsidian throne, and the chains on the armrests reach for it. They coil around its wrists and ankles and pull it onto the seat. The green runes flare one last time. The lich's voice slides into Min-jun's skull again. It tells him he's stronger than it expected. Then it tells him this changes nothing. The island is a gate. The gate is opening. And when it does, the real masters will step through, and they won't need a dragon. They'll burn the whole kingdom just for sport. The throne sinks into the floor, chains and all. The green light gutters, and the lich is gone. Min-jun stands in the silent cavern, with his draconic arms smoking and his wings shedding embers onto the stone. Elys lands beside him, and he drops to his knees. He reaches for her, and his talons are shaking. She presses her head against his chest and sends him warmth through the bond. He looks at the cracked totems, the dead wraith ash, the empty dais. The lich is gone. Hyun-so was never the real enemy. Their father was murdered by a monster to breed a dragon rider, and the monster is still out there, still waiting. And the gate it spoke of is somewhere on this island, and it's already opening. He forces himself to stand. He tells Elys they're not done. Min-jun limps toward Elys across the scorched stone. She isn't the same drake that fell into the chasm. Her scales shimmer with streaks of molten silver, same as his arm. Her wings have grown translucent in patches, glowing faintly. Her eyes hold a second set of pupils, vertical and gold inside the blue. The bond pulses between them, no longer just words. It sends her heartbeat into his chest. He feels her breathing inside his own lungs. The synchronization hits like a lightning strike. Min-jun's new arm locks into a posture he didn't choose. Elys mirrors it without looking. Their minds snap into one shared field of perception. He sees through her eyes while still seeing through his own. The cavern lightens. Every shadow in the room has a sharp edge now, and each edge is a target. The leftover wraiths that fled earlier try to creep back. One of them lunges from a crack in the wall. Min-jun doesn't turn. Elys pivots and snaps her jaws, and the wraith becomes ash. Another tries from above, dropping from a stalactite. Min-jun's wing sweeps backward and turns it to smoke without him even glancing. They're not just bonded, they're a single weapon now. The hybrid's power is immense. He doesn't just tear through minions, he deletes them. The cavern floor erupts with skeletal knights that the Lich kept buried. Their armor glows green, and their eyes burn with necrotic fire. Min-jun walks straight into their formation. His talon cleaves a shield in half, then the skeleton behind it. Elys strafes the rear line with a jet of silver flame. The knights don't have time to raise their weapons. Bones clatter and bounce across the obsidian floor. More pour from the walls, armed with rusted greatswords and bone-shard spears. Min-jun's wings beat once, and he launches into the air. He comes down with both talons first, driving an armored skeleton into the stone so hard it craters. The shockwave flips 3 others onto their backs. Elys lands beside him, and her tail sweeps a whole rank into the air. They move together so fast, it's hard to track. Min-jun's right arm blocks a spear thrust, and Elys's fire takes the attacker's head off before the spear can even break. The boy from the stable yard doesn't exist anymore. This is the Dragon Rider in full resonance. The few wraiths that still cling to the edges don't even try to engage. They dissolve into the walls and flee deeper into the dungeon. The Shadow Lord watches from the edge of the chamber. His mask is gone now, revealing a lipless skull with green runes etched into the bone. He raises both hands toward the ceiling. The remaining totems all flare at once, and the death nova begins. A ring of green-black energy explodes outward from the Lich's body. It kills everything it touches. What's left of the skeletal knights in the blast radius turns to dust instantly. The stone floor cracks and blackens, and the air smells like burning graves. Min-jun has half a second. He throws himself in front of Elys and spreads his wings wide. The nova hits him full force. The green fire wraps around his scales, searching for a way in. It finds the gaps where his human skin still shows. At the shoulder, along the ribs. The pain is immediate and absolute. His wings flicker and dim, and his hair flashes white all the way to the roots. He doesn't fall. He holds the barrier until the wave passes, and by the time it's done, he looks 10 years older than he was a minute ago. His face is gaunt, and new lines cut deep around his eyes. Elys shrieks behind him, unharmed but furious. Min-jun spits blood onto the scorched stone and straightens. The Shadow Lord is already moving toward a rift in the air behind the obsidian throne. The Lich doesn't run gracefully. One of his arms hangs limp where Min-jun's talons caught him earlier. Min-jun crosses the distance before the rift can stabilize. Elys banks left and exhales a tight beam of fire that cuts off the Lich's escape path. The Lich hisses and conjures a bone barrier, but Min-jun's talon shears through it. He drives the claws deep into the Lich's ribcage. Green ichor sprays across the floor, and the runes on the Lich's skull flicker. The Shadow Lord shrieks and shoves himself backward with a pulse of force. He tumbles through the rift, but half his torso stays in this plane. Min-jun's talon is still lodged in it. The Lich screams a promise as the rift contracts. He tells Min-jun that the gate is already open, and the old ones are coming, and they don't care about dragons or riders. They'll crush the kingdom like an anthill. The rift snaps shut with a sound like breaking glass. Min-jun's talon comes free with a chunk of the Lich's ribs still attached. The bone crumbles to powder a heartbeat later. The cavern goes silent. Min-jun collapses. He doesn't mean to. His legs just stop holding him. He hits the stone and slides a few inches, and the draconic arm shudders. The scales begin to recede, pulling back into his skin with a sound like gravel grinding. The wings fold, flicker, and then dissolve into silver embers that scatter across the floor. Elys rushes to his side, but she's shrinking too. Her drake bulk collapses inward, and her scales lose their glow. In 10 seconds, she's no bigger than a house cat, curled against his chest. Hatchling form. Min-jun looks at his reflection in a shard of obsidian. The face staring back is 50 years old, hollow-cheeked, gray at the temples. He tries to lift his hand, and it trembles like an old man's. Elys sends him a weak pulse of warmth through the bond. She's exhausted too, but she's alive. They're broken, but they're alive. That's enough for now. Time passes. Maybe hours, maybe a day. Min-jun wakes on a cot. The ceiling is canvas, not stone. Candlelight flickers on the fabric, and someone has covered him with a wool blanket. He tries to sit up, and a hand gently pushes him back down. It's Lady Ryu Seo-yeon. She looks at his aged face without flinching and asks if he's done trying to die alone. He croaks something about the island and the Lich. She tells him her scouts found the wreckage of his ships and tracked him here. She brought healers, supplies, and a full retinue of hunters loyal to her house. She offers him a cup of water. Then, she offers him something bigger. Her house will back him openly. Funds, soldiers, political cover. Whatever it takes to finish what he started. Min-jun stares at her for a long moment. Elys, still tiny, climbs up onto his shoulder and tilts her head. He doesn't have the strength to refuse. A scout bursts into the tent before Min-jun can answer. The man is pale and sweating, and his armor is dented. He gasps out the news. Hyun-soo is marching on the capital. His army is undead, numbering in the thousands, raised from old battlefields by necromancers in black robes. The city walls are being fortified, but the guilds are in chaos. Half of them are already preparing to flee. The scout says Hyun-soo is at the head of the column himself, wearing armor of fused bone and carrying a blade that drinks light. He's promised to burn everything unless the council hands over his brother. Min-jun swings his legs off the cot. Elys chirps, and the sound is small but not afraid. Lady Ryu watches him and asks what his plan is. He looks at his hands, old and scarred, and then at the hatchling on his shoulder. He tells her the plan is simple. He's going to the capital. He's going to stand on the wall. And when his brother arrives, he's going to remind him exactly who he's dealing with. The tent flap snaps open, and Min-jun is already on his feet. Lady Ryu hands him a leather tunic reinforced with steel plates at the chest. She doesn't bother with a speech about hope or courage. She tells him he looks like a corpse, and a corpse won't inspire anyone. Elys chirps from his shoulder and blinks at the lady with an expression that almost looks offended. Min-jun pulls the tunic on and straps a sword to his hip. His hands still tremble. The gray at his temples hasn't faded, and the lines around his eyes are deep enough to hold shadow. But he stands straight, and that's enough. They leave the tent and step into a camp that has transformed while he slept. Lady Ryu's retainers have turned the beachhead into a proper staging ground. Supply wagons roll in from the ships, and hunters in her house colors check their gear by the firelight. A quartermaster shouts numbers at a scribe, and a smith hammers a dent out of a breastplate on a portable anvil. Min-jun scans the faces and sees something he didn't expect. These people aren't panicking. They're preparing. A young hunter with a scar across her nose approaches and hands him a sealed letter. It's from Captain Jang Do-hyuk, the soldier who helped him escape the capital. The letter says the city gates are still holding, but 3 of the outer watchtowers have fallen. Hyun-seo's undead don't tire, don't eat, don't stop. The defenders have maybe 2 days before the walls are breached. Min-jun crumples the letter and looks at Lady Ryu. He asks how many hunters she can give him. She says 200, give or take. A few dozen of them are A rank. The rest are B and C. Solid fighters, but nothing that can stand against a full undead legion on open ground. Min-jun exhales and runs a hand through his graying hair. Elys presses her snout against his ear and sends him a pulse of heat. She can still sense necromantic energy, even in her hatchling state. That's their edge. If they can find Hyun-seo's necromancers and take them out, the army loses its cohesion. He tells Lady Ryu they're not going to fight a pitched battle. They're going to hunt. The march to the capital takes half a day through the coastal lowlands. Min-jun rides at the head of the column on a borrowed warhorse. Elys perches on the pommel of his saddle like a silver gargoyle. She's too small to fly more than a few dozen yards, but her eyes never stop moving. Every few minutes, she chirps in a specific direction, and Min-jun adjusts their course. She's tracking something. The column crests a ridge just before sunset, and the capital sprawls below them. It's worse than the scout described. Smoke rises from a dozen points inside the walls. The western gate is a charred ruin, and the outer district is crawling with shambling shapes. Undead legionaries, skeletons in rusted armor, move in perfect formation through the streets. Behind them, taller figures wreathed in black mist direct the assault. Those are the necromancers. Min-jun counts at least 6. Elys hisses, and her scales flicker with faint silver light. She points her snout toward a crumbling bell tower in the merchant quarter. That's the signal hub. Every necromancer in the city is linked to that tower by thin streams of dark mana only Elys can see. Min-jun turns to Lady Ryu and outlines the plan. Her hunters will strike the main gate and draw the undead's attention. He and Elys will slip through the rat tunnels he used months ago and reach the bell tower. If they can destroy the hub, the necromancers lose control of the horde. Lady Ryu doesn't argue. She draws her sword and rides down the ridge with 200 hunters behind her. The charge hits the undead line like a hammer. Steel meets bone, and the night fills with the shriek of metal and the howl of dying men. Min-jun doesn't watch. He's already moving. He finds the tunnel entrance behind a collapsed tannery. The smell is exactly as he remembers it. Rot and wet stone, and something older. Elys hops off his shoulder and scurries ahead, her small body glowing just enough to light the way. They move fast. The tunnels are empty now. The rat swarm that used to infest them has either fled the undead or been consumed by them. Min-jun's boots splash through shallow water as he runs, and his breath comes hard. His body is old now, older than it should be, and every step costs something. But he doesn't stop. They emerge from the tunnel into the basement of a burned-out warehouse. The bell tower is 2 streets over. Min-jun climbs through a shattered window and presses his back against an alley wall. The street beyond is a war zone. Undead soldiers march in blocks of 20, their eye sockets glowing with that same black mist. Civilians huddle behind barricades made of overturned carts and broken furniture. A squad of city guards holds a choke point with spears and torches, but they're flagging. Min-jun doesn't have time to help them. He crosses the street in a dead sprint, Elys clinging to his collar. An undead legionary spots him and lunges. Min-jun ducks under its rusted blade, rolls, and keeps running. Elys spits a tiny fireball over his shoulder that catches the thing's tunic and slows it down. They reach the bell tower's base. The door is covered in necromantic runes that pulse with sickly green light. Min-jun doesn't bother with a key. He draws his sword, channels a thread of dragon energy through the blade, and drives it into the lock. The runes scream and shatter, and the door swings open. Inside, the tower is a vertical nightmare. The central shaft climbs 5 stories, and every level is lined with cages. Inside the cages are people, still alive, their life force being siphoned through black tendrils that coil up toward the peak. This is the battery. The necromancers aren't just directing the undead, they're fueling them. Min-jun's jaw tightens. Elys shrieks, and the sound is high and furious. She may be small, but she's still a dragon. They climb. The stairs are narrow and slick with something Min-jun doesn't want to name. At the 3rd landing, a necromancer in black robes steps out of a side chamber. He raises a staff crackling with dark energy. Min-jun doesn't give him time to cast. He lunges forward and drives his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him against the stone wall. The staff clatters to the floor. Min-jun brings his sword up and ends it in one motion. The tendrils connected to the cages on that level flicker and die. Elys chirps and presses forward. 4 more necromancers wait at the top. The bell chamber is a wide, circular room with a massive bronze bell hanging from the center. The tendrils from the cages converge here, feeding into a crystal orb suspended beneath the bell. The orb pulses with stolen life force, and the 4 necromancers stand around it in a ritual circle. They see Min-jun the moment he bursts through the trapdoor. The lead necromancer, a woman with half her face replaced by a bone mask, hisses an order. The others raise their staves, and the air fills with black bolts. Min-jun dives behind an overturned pew. The bolts punch through the wood like it's paper. Elys scrambles up the wall and positions herself above the ritual circle. She's too small for a killing flame, but she's not helpless. She drops onto the bone-masked necromancer from above and sinks her tiny fangs into the woman's wrist. The necromancer shrieks and loses concentration. The ritual falters for half a second. That's all Min-jun needs. He vaults over the pew and closes the distance in 3 strides. His sword takes the first necromancer across the throat before the man can react. The second spins to face him, but Min-jun kicks his knee sideways and the man crumples. The third raises a barrier of shadow, but Min-jun channels dragon energy into his fist and punches through it. The barrier shatters, and the necromancer staggers back into the bell. The impact rings out across the city like a war horn. Only the bone-masked leader remains. Elys is still clamped onto her arm, and the woman is bleeding black ichor down her sleeve. She snarls something in a language Min-jun doesn't recognize and grabs the crystal orb. The tendrils connecting the cages go berserk, thrashing wildly and draining faster. Min-jun knows he has seconds before the prisoners die. He rushes her. She hurls the orb at his chest. The crystal hits him square in the sternum and erupts with stored life force. Min-jun's body lights up with borrowed vitality. For one glorious second, he feels 30 years younger. Then, it starts to burn. The energy isn't pure. It's corrupted, filtered through the necromancer's rituals. His veins glow sickly green under his skin. Elys shrieks and releases the necromancer, scrambling toward him. Through the bond, she pushes her own clean dragon warmth against the corruption. It's not enough to purge it, but it's enough to steady him. Min-jun grits his teeth and swings his sword through the crystal orb. The thing explodes. Corrupted energy washes over the bell chamber, and every tendril in the tower snaps at once. Below them, cage doors swing open, and prisoners spill out into the stairwell. The bone-masked necromancer screams as her ritual collapses, and her own magic turns on her. She dissolves into black ash that scatters across the floor. The bell rings one more time, and then the tower goes silent. Min-jun drops to his knees. Elys curls against his chest, trembling. He looks out through the bell chamber's arched window and watches the undead army in the streets below. The black mist that animated them is thinning. Legionaries stumble and collapse. Skeletons crumble into piles of bone. Every necromancer in the city just lost their power source. Lady Ryu's hunters press the advantage and drive the remnants back through the ruined gate. The siege is broken. Min-jun doesn't celebrate. He climbs to his feet and leans on the window ledge. Elys sends him a question through the bond. Where now? He looks toward the inner city, toward the palace that crowns the highest hill. Hyun-soo isn't in the streets. Hyun-soo is in the throne room. He always had a flair for drama. Min-jun descends the tower with Elys on his shoulder. The prisoners he freed are huddled in the street, dazed and shivering but alive. Lady Ryu's hunters find him as he emerges. She's there too, her armor dented and her sword notched, but her eyes are bright. She tells him the city is secured. She asks if he's going after his brother. He nods once. She doesn't try to stop him or offer to come. She knows this is his fight. Min-jun walks through the liberated streets toward the palace. The doors are already open. Undead corpses litter the marble floor, but they're inert now, just bones and rags. The throne room waits at the end of a long gallery lined with portraits of dead kings. Hyun-soo is there, sitting on the throne like he owns it. His bone armor gleams with frost, and the light-drinking blade rests across his knees. He looks up when Min-jun enters and smiles. He says he was wondering how long it would take. Min-jun doesn't waste words. He draws his sword. Hyun-soo rises, and the temperature in the room drops 20 degrees. Ice spreads across the marble floor, and frost crawls up the pillars. He tells Min-jun that this is the end he always wanted. Brother against brother, dragon against ice, winner takes everything. Min-jun looks at Elys. She's still tiny, still fragile, but her eyes burn silver. He reaches inside himself for the bond. The hybrid form is still there, buried under exhaustion and borrowed age, but it's there. He pulls on it. The transformation hurts more than it ever has. His bones creak and his joints pop, and the gray in his hair spreads another inch. But the scales come. Draconic plates flow over his right arm and shoulder, and his fingers lengthen into talons. The wings don't manifest fully, just a shimmer of silver energy at his back. His eyes go slit-pupilled and gold. Hyun-soo's smile falters. He's seen this form before, but he's never been on the receiving end of its rage. He raises his blade, and the light in the room dims as the weapon drinks every flicker of torchlight. Min-jun launches himself forward. The fight is brutal and fast. Hyun-soo hurls ice spikes that shatter against Min-jun's scales. Min-jun answers with slashes that carve grooves into the frost-covered floor. They crash into the pillars and the walls, and the throne room fills with the sound of breaking stone. Elys scrambles along the ceiling beams, tracking Hyun-soo's movements and feeding Min-jun information through the bond. She calls out every feint, every shift in weight, every gathering of mana. Min-jun doesn't dodge. He doesn't have the stamina. He takes hits and keeps moving, trading damage for position. Hyun-soo's blade scores a line across his ribs, and the wound steams in the cold air. Min-jun's talon rakes across Hyun-soo's chestplate and rips 3 of the bone plates free. They separate for a moment, both gasping. Hyun-soo is bleeding. Min-jun is older than he's ever been. The dragon energy is eating through his remaining youth like fire through dry grass. He knows he has one shot. Elys drops from the ceiling and lands on the back of the throne. She opens her tiny jaws and breathes a flame no bigger than a candle. It hits the frost on Hyun-soo's armor and does nothing. But that's not the point. The point is the distraction. Hyun-soo glances at her, just for a heartbeat. Min-jun crosses the distance. He drives his talon through Hyun-soo's stomach, lifts him off the ground, and slams him backward onto the throne. The impact cracks the ancient stone seat down the middle. Hyun-soo's eyes go wide. The light-drinking blade falls from his hand and clatters across the floor. Min-jun leans in close, his draconic arm still buried in his brother's gut. He tells Hyun-soo that this is for their father. Hyun-soo tries to laugh, but blood bubbles out instead. He whispers something about the old ones, about the gate already being open, and then he goes still. Min-jun pulls his talon free and steps back. The hybrid form unravels. Scales retract, wings dissolve, and he's just a gray-haired man standing over his brother's body. Elys hops onto his shoulder and presses her head against his cheek. Min-jun looks up at the ceiling of the throne room. The sky is visible through a hole in the roof, torn open by the Shadow Lord's escape. Clouds churn above the city, and something moves inside them. Something vast. A shape darkens the sky from horizon to horizon. It's a dragon, but not like Elys. This thing is old, older than the kingdom, older than the mountains. Its wingspan blots out the stars, and its scales are the color of obsidian, streaked with veins of molten gold. It descends through the clouds with the slow, terrible grace of a falling moon. Elys freezes. Min-jun feels her fear through the bond, sharp and cold. He steps out of the throne room onto the ruined balcony. The dragon lands in the palace courtyard, and the impact shakes the earth. Its head lowers until one eye, bigger than a man, fixes on Min-jun. A voice enters his mind, deep and resonant and full of fire. It says it has been watching. It says it watched the Shadow Lord flee and the Lich's master stir in the dark between worlds. It says the old ones are coming, and the gate was never truly closed. It asks Min-jun if he is ready.